Release that witch eye by Ermu. Chapter 21. What do you actually desire? When Nightingale finished, the room was silent again, only the occasional crackling of the burning candles were heard. Roland had a serious look on his face, and he finally had a general understanding of the witches. Most witches had their awakening during the months of the demons. That was, according to legend, when the door to hell was open. Generally speaking, adulthood was the dividing line for a witch. After the age of 18, any woman who hadn't awoken would probably never become a witch, but the women who awoke before they were 18 had to bear a pain, like some spirit was devouring their bodies, every year on the day of their awakening. This unimaginable pain caused Nightingale's voice to clearly tremble when she came to this part of her explanation. According to her personal experience, it was just like something trying to break out of her body. In every blood vessel, muscle, and tendon, an unbearable pain would arise, and blood would seep out of the skin and one's eyes would protrude out of their sockets. If you could survive all this, your body would need 4 to 5 days to recover, but if you couldn't survive it, you would not only die from miserable torture, but moreover your moment of death would be a spectacle too horrible to endure. Nightingale had witnessed the death of several companions. Their bodies would lose the ability to support themselves, and they would change into round and bulging meatballs. Blood mixed with other body fluids and internal organs would spray out of every possible hole, and the air around the body would turn into black fog. When finally everything possible was violently ejected, only a layer of black, burned epidermis would be left on the ground. This was the reason why witches were regarded as the devils incarnate. Upon the sight of this scene, ordinary people would naturally be terrified, so who would care about the real cause of their death? In addition, the church is adding fuel to the fire, claiming that the witches were possessed by evil spirits, so over time, the witches became evil incarnations. Regardless of how outsiders viewed them, this kind of torture was real. Witches were generally short-lived because of this. Every year it would become harder to endure, so many witches would choose to end their own lives. When a witch became 18 and turned into an adult, the pain of the devouring evil spirits was known as the most difficult checkpoint to cross. In fact, the magic the witches obtained before the checkpoint was not complete. Only in adulthood would this power become stable. After the stability of their magic, there was a substantial increase in their power, and there was even a possibility of developing new branches of magic. Unfortunately, the stability process was very painful. The pain of feeling their own body be devoured surpassed the limit what ordinary people could bear, and many witches would die on the day of their adulthood. Roland, after listening to this explanation, was silent for a long time. He only whispered, "In ancient books it is recorded that witches at the Holy Mountain get eternal peace, without having to suffer the demon's torture. Is this really true?" No one knows this, because the Holy Mountain has only appeared in legends. But if we take them to the camp of the Witches' Cooperation Association, their chances of survival will be much greater. If the witches didn't need to hide ourselves, if we could live freely, then the devouring pain of the evil spirits would be much weaker compared to the past. For a moment Roland was terribly upset. His plan would not work without Anna's and Nana's help, but because of his plan they would need to bear an enormous risk. He really couldn't help it. In the end he weakly said, "Anna is downstairs, I'll ask her to come over. If she is willing to, you can take her and leave. As for Nana, I will have to see her tomorrow." "Thank you for your understanding, I really had the right impression of you." Nightingale stood up to express her gratitude. At this time Anna had yet to fall asleep, so when Roland went to get her, she was sitting properly at the table copying something. She looked surprised to see Roland. When she heard she had to go to the prince's room, Anna did not ask any questions and obediently followed him to his room. When she entered the room to find that there was a person there, the young girl was truly frightened. Roland took her hand and briefly introduced them to each other, and the three encircled a round table and sat down. Then Nightingale repeated the words they had said before, "In the camp, and there are a lot of people like you, they are your partners. This should roughly summarize your case, Miss Anna, though you and I have signed an employment contract. In the case of such a potentially life-threatening situation, I have to respect your opinion. In case you agree, I won't go." Roland blanked out, "What did you say, Dash?" "I said I won't go," said Anna at lightning speed to interrupt Roland's sentence. "I want to stay here." "Anna, I'm not lying to you." Nightingale frowned. "I can feel your magic increasing in your body, it's getting close to maturity. 2 months after the beginning of the months of the demons will be your day of adulthood. If we get you to the camp before then, it will be much safer." Anna didn't pay any attention to what Nightingale said. Instead, she turned her head and looked at Roland. "Your Highness, do you remember when you asked me if I would like to go back to Carl's college, with Nana and the other children to learn together?" Roland nodded. "I did not answer, but afterwards you spoke about living like a normal person, but I do not care about that," said Anna with her smooth and natural voice. "I just want to stay at your Highness' side, nothing more." Roland had thought that he understood Anna's personality before, but now he realized that he really did not understand her. Looking in her eyes, he couldn't read any emotions. There was no dependence. Nor did she adore him. He couldn't see anything, he only could see tranquility all the way to the end. He remembered the scene when they met for the first time. At that time, she also had her calm expression. The difference now was that in this moment her face was full of life, just like a budding flower. She still didn't fear death, but right now she wasn't waiting for her execution like last time. "The devouring by evil spirits will not kill me," said Anna with confidence. "I'll beat it." Nightingale closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Well, that's enough, understand? Will you leave alone, just like that?" Roland asked. "No, I have a good life here." She drew her hood over her head and stood up. "Anyway, before the end of this month the demon camp will not move." "Why?" Roland had a surprise. Did she also want to monitor them throughout the winter? "I think people who have not experienced the process of adulthood can't understand how dangerous it is. I myself was on the edge of death again and again. I also witnessed the death of my companions. When that day comes, I may be able to help her. If..." Nightingale shrugged her shoulders. "If she cannot make it, I also have experience in handling the funeral." She went to the door and retrieved her own dagger, then she turned to Roland and curtsied once again. "In that way, I have to say goodbye." And then her body gradually disappeared into the darkness, like mist. She didn't leave the slightest trace. Was this Nightingale's ability? Roland looked pensive. There was no sound or trace of her. He was simply a natural assassin. And from the first-hand view he got of her dagger-throwing technique, he concluded that she definitely had received training in it. Was the Witch Cooperation Association not only gathering witches, but also developing their own force? Or had Nightingale already mastered these skills before she entered the Witch Cooperation Association? Roland could not find any useful information from the relevant information of their organization and the memories of the former Roland, but he had the premonition that he would absolutely meet this organization again, as long as he stuck to his path of recruiting witches. "It's already late, you should quickly go back to sleep," Roland patted the girl's head. It was somewhat unexpected for him when Anna brushed his hand away and left the room without saying a word. When the door was closed, and the lights were cut off, she was enveloped by her shadow. She gently leaned herself against the door, and her lake-like eyes were no longer calm. Anna raised her arms to hide her face, and whispered with a barely audible voice. "Fool." Chapter 22 Declaration. The next day the rain finally stopped, and Border Town became lively once again. Many villagers gathered on the square, talking while awaiting the fourth prince's speech. The day before, Roland had posted a notice regarding this presentation on the bulletin board. Anyone who came to the square and listened to his speech would receive a bowl of wheat porridge and half a loaf of bread. For the townspeople, this was equivalent to a free lunch, thus there were much more people here to watch than the time when the witch was hanged. When it was close to noon, Roland ascended onto a previously prepared stage. Faced with the dense mass of people before him, he would be lying if he said he wasn't nervous. Most of the time in his former life he only dealt with computer monitors. Even if he attended a meeting he was always sitting in the audience to applaud, so facing such a kind of battle was a first. But he had to step on stage. If he wanted most of the people to stay in Border Town, they would need a greater defense, and without motivation they would all leave. Roland waved with his arm, and everyone quieted down. He had practiced this scene many times, but when he stepped on the stage, his mouth was still a little dry. People of my territory, good afternoon. I'm the fourth Prince of Grey Castle, Roland Wimbledon. At this moment we gathered together, because there is an important message I have to tell you. 4 days ago, the ambassador of Longsong Stronghold arrived. His mission was to receive the mine ore. We all know that a month ago, we suffered from a disastrous accident, the collapse of the mine in the northern mountain slope. Even today, the mining area isn't fully restored, so we can't produce as much as we used to. The result of the accident was that we only output the equivalent of 2 months in the last quarter. I explained the situation to the messenger, since I hoped he would loan us 3 months' worth of food, and we would pay the missing ore at the end of winter, but he refused. There was no room for negotiation. He refused to set aside any more food, just like they did 2 years ago. The crowd burst in alarm. Clearly everyone's suffering from 2 years ago was still remembered. This time it will be even worse. The Longsong Stronghold astrologer told me that this time the months of the demons will be even longer, most likely lasting more than 4 months. That means, this time all of us will face 2 months of a food gap. 2 years ago, we lost 20% of the population. Someone lost a brother, someone lost a child, but this time, how much will we lose? No. Your Highness, you have to save us. Someone shouted from underneath, then more people shouted, Your Highness, I beg you to help us. It seemed that planting some people in the crowd, who would speak in his interest, was the right choice. Roland raised his hand again, suppressing the voices of the people. Of course, I will not leave my entrusted people. I will never do that. You may not know, but Longsong Stronghold annually ships wheat and bread to us, and they carried away the ore we mine, but it isn't equivalent to the normal market price. According to the market price, 2 months of ore should be enough for half a year of food. I have sold the ore to Willow Town. Their cargo ship full of food will soon arrive at Border Town. In addition to bread, there will be cheese, honey, and meat. For a whole winter, everyone can eat one's fill. The square burst into cheers. However, this is equivalent to breaking off relations with Longsong Stronghold, so they will not accept any person during the winter. As a result, this winter, we will all have to stay in Border Town. Most people have been at the west border of our town. There we are currently establishing a strong wall. I know many people are anxious of the invasion from the demonic beasts, but we can block them. I want to tell you that the demonic beasts are not much more powerful than normal forest beasts. Although they have rough skin and thick meat, they cannot climb walls, and they also cannot eat stones. They have a thick skin, but they are just a group of easy-to-aim-at targets. Tell me, my beloved people, are you willing to hide in Longsong Stronghold, living in shacks and starving to a useless death? Or under my leadership, will you protect your loved ones and children, guarding Border Town until the last minute? I promise, everyone who stays until the end of the months of the demons and protects the other townspeople on the city wall will get a reward of 25 silver royals. If someone sacrifices himself while defending the town, his family will receive a compensation of 5 gold royals. Your Highness, we want to fight with you. Under the guidance of his own people placed in the crowd, more and more people swore to wage war. Seeing the atmosphere surge up, Roland timely ordered to issue lunch. He did not expect that everyone would stay in Border Town. As long as half of the people were willing to stay, he would have a chance to obstruct the demonic beasts from moving forward. Asterisk. While Petrov was bringing back the message to the 6 noble families only to be met with laughter, he naturally did not know that the 4th prince was inciting the townspeople. You said that the incompetent prince actually wants to throw off the demonic beasts alone? Daring to build walls before winter, I don't know, should I praise him for his courage or mock him for overestimating himself? His Royal Highness' lack of courage is a known fact. When did the 4th prince find his guts? He is just stupid, and nothing more. Yes, he did not even have a stonemason, he is only leaning on piling up unpolished stones and pasting wet mud between it. I'm afraid this piled-up stone wall will collapse immediately. Anyway, it's a good thing. If he flees to Longsong stronghold, we will be at the mercy of nature. But if he dies in the border town, we can soon end this farce. After he had meditated about the problem, the Duke suddenly spoke. Petrov, what do you think? Petrov was startled. He did not think that the Duke of Longsong stronghold would ask for his opinion. Well, I originally wanted to maintain a monopoly. As long as we could get the ore for 30% below the market price, it would still be a deal worthy for us. But, his mind calculated some ideas. But His Highness does not intend to sell all the ore to Longsong stronghold. He is even selling the ore for 50% lower than the market price, which means, he has plans to make a substantial increase in the ore production next year. As long as they are able to increase the production to the double of the former years, we may earn more than ever before. But he also intends to sell their own production of iron. Iron production is hot in demand, and resale would also be very easy. But, these are not the important points. Oh? What is important? If he can hold border town, it would also be very good news for us. We wouldn't have to focus on dealing with demonic beasts every year, which can save us a huge amount of expenditure. A second advantage would be that the vast amount land between the stronghold and the border town will be open for all of us. Whether it be cultivating the land or using it to settle new people, both choices would be good. This could greatly ease the current status of the overcrowded stronghold population. Petrov recited his ideas one by one, and the fourth prince will not always stay in border town. The fight for the throne will only last for 5 years. After 5 years we would get a more prosperous border town, and then we could include border town into the stronghold. Then the territory of the stronghold would become the third largest territory of the whole kingdom. So my advice is, he glanced at the Duke, and said carefully, the stronghold should send staff to help His Highness, and we should collaborate in the defense of border town. That's right, said the Duke, but those are the thoughts of a merchant, only interested in gains and losses. When he came to this point, he straightened his body, his eyes slowly swept to each of the participants, and his tone became awe-inspiring. However, I didn't get my status of today by weighing all the benefits with the losses. Why do I have to do business with a person who is out of my control? Some rules must be obeyed, and if they are broken, the trespasser must be punished. Whether border town is prosperous or broken is not important. What is important is that no one should ever think about taking the control away from me, even if he is a prince, he is no exception. Chapter 23 New Source of Power. Come on, try to join these 2 iron plates together, Roland said. Anna's finger pressed on the iron seams. A flame was ejected from her finger, melting the interface at a speed visible to the eyes. Reduce the firepower and start again with the reverse side. Anna nodded her head and did it once more. The 2 iron plates were firmly welded together at a 90-degree angle. Roland carefully examined the interface and found that the effect was just as he had imagined, a perfect weld without any flaws. With a little polishing, the fluid traces of molten iron could rub off. There was no difference with a modern welding technique. Very good, Miss Anna, simply excellent. Roland excitedly exclaimed. Next, we should also weld these 2 iron panels together. What is it? An iron bucket? No, it is a cylinder, corrected Roland. Cylinder? Repeated Anna, puzzled. Yes, the cylinder can be filled with air. Roland pointed to another square piece of iron. Do you see the small hole above it? The air can enter the cylinder through that small hole and push the piston. Well, and since the piston diameter is slightly smaller than the cylinder's diameter, it can move freely inside. Even the genius Anna, in front of so many unknown words, had question marks above her head. These, cylinder, piston, and so on, what do? They are needed for the purpose of manufacturing a machine that can move automatically. The steam engine brought the first industrial revolution. It was the driving force behind human development, completely replacing humans and animals in the workforce. It was a schematic diagram that each mechanic engineer was familiar with. To describe it in simple words, it was a larger version of a kettle. After boiling the water, the produced steam would be induced into the cylinder. There, it would push a piston that is connected to a pole. Like this, thermal energy was turned into mechanical energy. The principle was very simple, but it did not mean that it was easy to manufacture. Its difficulty laid in the sealing of the cylinder and piston, as well as the production of the gas pipeline. Without proper metal processing skills and only relying on manual forging, manufacturing a usable cylinder would only be a dream. However, with the help of Anna's ability, he could make up for the lack of their manufacturing skills. After much advanced planning, Roland came up with a design using 4 iron plates of the same size, like this, so the smithy could easily grind it. Then the iron plates would be welded together at a 90-degree angle by Anna. Like this, it was possible to get a highly stiff square cylinder. With the help of Anna, he didn't need to use the traditional production process. They created first a tubular boring machine, and then post-processed it to create a circular cylinder. The other big parts, too, could be divided into small pieces and then welded together. In this way, it was even possible to produce them in a small workshop. In this way, they were able to produce all of the components required for the steam engine. In fact, prior to the invention of welding, people could only rely on connecting small pieces by bolting or riveting. Since the internal cylinder must be smooth, normal connection methods obviously couldn't do this. The only problem was the gas pipeline. Its production process was nothing special. It needed to be heated up until it was red, and then the groove could be hammered into the right shape. This was also the method to produce a front-loading flintlock gun barrel. Later the barrel just needed straightening and counterbore rifling, etc., nothing that was too complicated. The problem was that it was impossible for Roland to call the blacksmith into the castle's back garden, since it was still not known that Anna hadn't been executed. Blacksmithing was not one of their strengths, but in a desperate attempt, they had to let the chief knight do it, under Roland's own command. After waiting for 3 days, Roland finally had the first steam engine ever standing in his back garden. "This is the powerful machine you were talking about?" Carter frowned while looking at the strange machine, but he had affirmed firsthand that this machine had nothing to do with magic. Each of the iron plates were personally molded by himself, and to him, it only looked like a sealed furnace. It was impossible for the devil to have any interest in it. But how could it move a pile of lump iron upwards? It looked very clumsy and had no feet. Was it possible that it could fly? But in Roland's eyes, this seemingly simple machine exuded the beauty of the modern industry. Standing on the shoulders of giants, he naturally did not need to invent the Newcomen steam engine, or the Watt steam engine. Instead he built an improved steam engine. His first prototype was already a high-pressure steam engine with a dual connecting rod and a slide valve. To make it better than most of the original steam engines, the key laid in some of newer innovative ideas. Soon you will understand it. Roland poured a bucket of water into the steam room and told Anna to ignite the firewood. 10 minutes later, the water was at a rolling boil. Soon, a creaking sound could be heard from the cylinder. Roland knew it was the sound of the thermal expansion of the cylinder. The thin iron piston's expansion was far greater than the cylinder's, and it would eventually press firmly against the cylinder wall. "Isn't this a water boiler?" "I did not think it would really be a furnace," Carter muttered. When the cylinder was full of steam, an excited scene appeared. The piston rod began to push outwards, and when the motion was at its apex, another rod would pull the slide valves, allowing the steam to push the piston inwards again. The wheel connected to the 2 poles would rotate very quickly through this motion, and with increased power, the speed very quickly reached its peak. The machine made an ear-piercing humming sound, and white gas was ejected, producing a kind of unstoppable and imposing aura. "That's what you called hidden forces in nature?" asked Anna, dumbfounded. The chief knight's face was full of wonder. The great iron wheel that he needed to spend a good deal of strength to install was now rotating like it was as light as a feather. Standing next to the wheel, he could even feel a new breeze. This only showed the astounding power of the steam engine. In his heart, a trace of anxiety gradually arose. His Highness had said that it could replace the power of humans and animals, and it seemed he hadn't lied. When placed on a horse-drawn chariot, it would be very hard for 10 knights to resist its brute force. Training a qualified knight needed 15 years, but the manufacturing of such a machine only needed 3 days. If the blacksmith only worked part-time, it would still only need a week. It didn't require feeding and wasn't afraid of cold or hunger. It also wasn't afraid of arrows and swords. Just install a ram in front of it, and it could bring rampage on the battlefield. As a traditional knight, was his existence still necessary? Asterisk. In the evening, when Roland returned to the bedroom, Nightingale was once again waiting for him. This time, she did not wear her hood, and she was smiling and sitting at the table. Her hands fiddled with a few parchments. It seems that the outside rumors really cannot be believed. They say the fourth prince is ignorant and has a bad character. In fact, he shouldn't have any learning or skills. In fact, compared with a court great master, he would not have time for civilities. This drawing on this paper, are these the plans for the steam stove? You call it steam engine, right? Shoot. Can't I even get a little privacy? Coming and going like you want, do you think this is your home? In his heart, Roland cursed her endlessly, but he still replied with a calm face, yes, those are the plans, but without Anna's help, they would forever be drawings only. What can it do? A lot. It can help with ore transportation, drainage, metal fabrication, forging, everywhere where strength is required it can play a role. Then I will take it. With this words Nightingale took the parchment and placed it in her robe. The Witch Cooperation Association has witches with the power of fire too. Hey! She shook her head to stop Roland's protest. Of course, I'm not only taking your stuff. Take a look at this first before complaining. She put a small amount of white stuff on the table. When Roland went over to the table, he found out that it was actually a roll of paper. He gently expands the roll, and swept through its content. This is a secret letter delivered by pigeons. Nightingale explained to him in a happy tone. The recipient was your maid Tyre, TSK. It looks like your harem isn't loyal. I have not touched her, Roland frowned. Tyre, he could remember that she seemed to follow him from a very early age, and the former fourth prince appeared to be interested in her, but unfortunately he failed to succeed in conquering her. He could only lightly harass her several times. Here in Border Town, to prevent the long wait for his own personal maid, she got the room next door to him. He did not expect that this was actually an arrangement made by one of his siblings. Although this letter was not signed, according to the content, he could judge that it was sent by one of his siblings. In the letter it revealed that the author was very unhappy with the last failure, but the plans for the riot in Longsong Stronghold were not allowed to fail again. Well, in fact, the first plan must have succeeded, he thought, or else he would have never become Roland Wimbledon. It was unlikely that this letter was forged by Nightingale, because only the people who were involved in this conspiracy could have been aware of the first assassination plan. And if Nightingale wanted to kill him, it wouldn't be a problem for her. How could you steal this from her? Your maid Tyre isn't stupid. Her intention was to burn the letter after reading it. Unfortunately, she looked away when I was just behind her. She made an act of sweeping something. So, how do you want to handle this? Do you need my help to deal with her? Roland naturally understood what she meant by deal, so he hesitated for a moment, then he finally nodded. I have to trouble you. He did not have the confidence to do this kind of thing himself. If you can, ask her who the person in the dark is. As you wish, Your Highness, Nightingale smiled while giving a salute. Well, this will be the reward for the drawing of the steam engine. Chapter 24 Development Plan. On the next morning, when Roland woke up, he wasn't served by his maid Tyre. Instead, it was an elderly maid. When he stepped out of the bedroom, his chief knight Carter was already waiting for him. Your Highness, I have bad news to deliver. Carter spoke with a low voice. Your maid Tyre died last night. What? Roland's eyelids jumped up. Although he already knew the result before, in his heart, he still felt a little uncomfortable. After all, she died because of his orders. She fell from the balcony in her own room. We couldn't find any signs of fighting, nor the guards saw any outsiders near the scene of the accident. So, it seems that she fell from the balcony by herself. It was an accident. The knight reported the results of his investigation, and at the same time, he searched for any weird fluctuations in Roland's eyes. Roland certainly knew what Carter was looking for. When they were in Grey Castle, it was known to everyone that the fourth prince wanted to take Tyre by force. In this day and age, it was an ordinary affair for a prince and a maid to have a relationship. This kind of matter was of least interest to others. After all, almost no nightlife existed, so there was nothing to do besides eating one's fill and doing the thing between man and woman. And not only with their own woman, the prince and the other upper nobility would exchange their women, sometimes they would even make an open party, so an affair between a prince and his maid was nothing more than a simple laugh. The former fourth prince was already known for being more moderate in this kind of matter, and later he was even replaced with Cheng Yan, who had never touched a woman after he became Roland. With the exception of Tyre, all the other maids could be described as shabby. In addition, after his crossing he directly had to face the months of the demons, so his mind was almost only filled with development plans, and he had no chance to enjoy the romantic life of a noble. That is really regretful. Roland put on a look of mourning. In the future, the senior maid who served me this morning should take over Tyre's position. She is the new head maid. Carter nodded and left after saluting. When Roland stepped into his office, he once more saw that Nightingale sat on his mahogany, redwood, table. "What are the results of your interrogation?" "Nothing, she directly killed herself when she saw me." Her frustration was clearly audible. She acted too fast, there wasn't even the slightest hesitation. "You actually didn't make her fall?" Roland walked around her and sat in the armchair. "I tied her up." Nightingale placed her body closer to him, but who could have known that she had hidden poison in her teeth? "So I had to fake an accidental fall." "I thought you were experienced." "So, do you think you did enough to get paid?" "Hey, don't talk like that." "Though I couldn't get anything directly from her mouth, that doesn't mean I didn't get anything." While chuckling, Nightingale put a folded sheet of paper in front of Roland. "I found this hidden in her room." Roland spread out the paper and saw that it was a letter. In the letter, Tyre referred to the recipient as sister, but the content was just plain gossip. However, he noted that the other person repeatedly referred to the sea, such as "the scenery was beautiful to view," "her favorite entertainment was staying on the beach watching the sunset," and other things like this. Finally, Tyre asked when she could see her older sister again, since she was missing her very much. When Roland thought of the territories his brothers and sisters governed, he was sure he knew who the conspirator was. "It should be my older sister Garcia, right?" "That is probably the case, since your two brothers cannot see the sea." "I guess." Third Princess Garcia Wimbledon took Tyre's sister hostage and hid her away. Judging from the decisive style of her suicide, it is unlikely to be a random arrangement. "What I mean is, before she was placed as your maid, she had at least 2 to 3 years of ample training." Roland sighed softly. Indeed, as expected of the fight for the throne, it would not end without bloodshed. Even if he didn't fight, it didn't mean that his siblings wouldn't drag him into it. To get the throne, his brothers and sisters would stop at nothing. He was afraid that something similar would happen again in the future. "Ah, someone's coming to speak with you." "You'll have to excuse me, Your Highness." Nightingale spoke in a teasing tone and blew hot air towards Roland, and then she suddenly disappeared in the blink of an eye. Although it wasn't the first time he saw her doing this, but seeing her vanish in broad daylight left Roland feeling shocked. He hesitated for a moment, and then he stretched out a finger towards the empty table. Halfway his finger was stopped by a very soft touch. "Your Highness, you cannot do this, you will make Anna very sad." Well, it seemed like her ability was invisibility and not teleportation, thought Roland, otherwise it really would be too powerful. Soon a knock was heard from the door. "Your Highness, it's me, Barav." Roland withdrew his finger and hid any expression that was on his face. "Come in." When the assistant minister stepped into the office, he was holding a large bundle of files. Even before he had sat down, he began his government report of the last week. Roland also turned his thoughts back, listening attentively to Barav's report. After living for a month in this world, he found himself able to keep up with Barav's rhythm, unlike the beginning where he was confused and disoriented, feeling completely out of place. In general, the finance of Border Town had a certain degree of improvement. The main point for this was the selling of the ore and rough stones to Willow Town. As payment, they had received nearly 200 gold royals. After they had used the money to buy food and to pay off wages, there were still 90 gold royals remaining. Bhairav was in good mood, with money to spare. Getting through this winter wouldn't be too difficult. But Roland was destined to not let him leave in good mood. I want to pick a group of townspeople to help fight against the demonic beasts, and from now on they will only have to concentrate on training. Their instructor will be my chief knight, and I will give him special instructions on how to train them. You will need to make a list of equipment or gear. These people will need leather armor and pikes. They also need to have 2 sets of winter clothes, so they can change clothes. Your Highness, this, according to the convention, isn't a temporary recruitment only allowed as the final option? If you send them to the battlefield without further training, they will only be a chaotic mob. Do you think it's possible to scare off the demonic beasts with numbers only? After the order collapses, we will only have more trouble. Your Highness, do you really insist on staying in Border Town? Asked Bhairav hesitantly. If we cannot restrain the demonic beasts, of course, I will retreat, but I do not think that we cannot even deal with a few mutations of normal animals. According to your future plans, we will need a greater amount of money. Hearing that the other side was such a miser, Roland had to laugh. These are necessary expenses, go and do it. In his own treasury were more than 300 gold royals, which were mainly used to pay for the construction of walls. The required steam engine materials and components ordered from the blacksmith shop were also paid for from his own pockets. For the first steam engine, he had to spend almost 20 gold royals, and he would need at least 3 engines. The invention of the steam engine was a key component of the Industrial Revolution. This was true, but it didn't mean that the steam engine was equivalent to the Industrial Revolution. In history, the United Kingdom was looking for a possibility to replace the people and livestock involved in order to increase the productivity in mining operations. When Watt improved the steam engine, he immediately received a huge amount of orders. This new power was also spread to various industries in a very short period of time. At this point of time, there was no basis for the Industrial Revolution in a small border town. It could even be said that industry did not exist. So Roland did not expect to make a pot of gold by selling the steam engine. He just wanted to put this machine in the northern mining area to pull ore and gravel. And when the mining production was increased, he would expand the scale of use of the steam engines. It would be the equivalent of the promotion of the industrial development from top to bottom. Chapter 25 Militia. These are the people you selected. When Roland looked at the group of civilians dressed in shabby clothes, all his courage flew away immediately. Your Highness, these are the people who fulfilled your requirements, said Carter. He began to count them with his fingers. Male, no criminal records, between 18 to 40 years of age, no disabilities. I carefully inspected all of them. Well, he knew he shouldn't have expected too much. After all, this world's productivity was much too low. Having enough to eat was already a difficult task, so wearing shabby clothes was just normal. As a prince, he had ignored such things. Just leaving his castle, he could see many people who only wore clothes that did not cover the whole body, begging for something to eat. In fact, in the capital of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, there existed a job as a corpse carrier. The only thing they would do was to collect the people who starved to death and then burn their bodies every day. So what was the general fighting power in this world? Roland closed his eyes and reviewed his plan carefully again. Probably a little stronger than a high-level street fighter. Generally, when the lords decided to wage war, or more precisely fight, Roland thought naming their little fights as war would be overstating it. They would summon all the aristocracy placed under their jurisdiction in their territory. A lord would always split his territory into many smaller territories and select lower ranks of nobility to govern them, like a duke would select earls, the earls would select viscounts, and they again would select barons, and so on. These nobles usually had a group of knights and mercenaries as their personal army. They were the main force in combats, equipped with a complete suit of armor and sophisticated weapons. At the same time, they would recruit civilians and farmers who worked on their territory to help out during combat. In fact, they were used to deliver food supplies to the troops, and when needed they would even fill up the holes in the front lines as cannon fodder. The most people who died on the battlefield were the people used as cannon fodder. Fighting between nobles would rarely result in someone's death. They generally would be caught and later exchanged for ransom. Roland did not expect help from the several other nobles in Border Town to fight against the demonic beasts. In fact, they had no relationship with Border Town. Most of the local barons were living in Longsong Stronghold. The stronghold was also under the jurisdiction of the regional aristocracy. An all-civilian force was in this day and age a very imaginative thing. After all, they were stupid and ignorant, failed to understand strategies, nor could they understand the commanding structure, and they also hadn't received professional combat training. How could they compare to a knight who was trained in the art of the sword from when he was 10 years old? Carter, who stood near Roland, whispered some advice to him. "Your Highness, this project is not feasible. You look at them and tell me, which of them can hold and balance a sword? I'm afraid that when they encounter the demonic beasts, many of them will desert us, and at that time it will affect the stability of our defense. I suggest that we hire professional mercenaries from Willow Town or elsewhere to guard the walls and let these people do their normal chores." "No, I'll use them," Roland refused Carter's suggestion. He didn't have a good opinion of the mercenaries who worked for money and did not love the land, and besides, he didn't form his army to only deal with the demonic beasts. Throughout history, it was seen that only a force whose member came from their own civilities would be strong and full of vitality. Whether it was the feudal forces, the forces from the not very distant past, or modern army troops, there were countless examples which verified this rule. "Well, you have the final say," said Carter while shrugging with his shoulders. "Then I will start to train them from tomorrow onwards? Although I don't know how useful that will be." "With a sword?" "No, you will first take them all for long-distance running." Roland suddenly thought of the fact that his chief knight never had experienced these kinds of training exercises. Without any better options, he had to change his plan. "Try to find the hunter from last time and bring him to me. You both will be the first to look at how I will handle the training." Asterisk. Today's experience may be even more inconceivable than what happened in the last 2 decades combined. He actually saw His Highness, the 4th Prince Roland Wimbledon, from close range. He passed directly by himself and even smiled to him. My God, was the prince drunk? 3 days ago, when he heard the speech of the 4th Prince on the square, he knew that this winter would be different from the past. This time, they would not go to Longsong Stronghold. Instead, they would spend the long winter here. The truth was that he didn't understand most of the reasons mentioned by the prince, but he supported from the bottom of his heart the result of this decision. His own brother died 2 years ago in the slums of Longsong Stronghold after a whole month without any food supply. They could only rely on the hard-earned coppers he got from unloading goods at the docks. With them, he was able to buy some black bread and share it with his brother. But the winter was too cold. The wind would blow through the many holes in their slum shack. Without enough to eat and with no possibility to maintain their body temperature, they couldn't survive. When his brother got sick, he fell into a coma and never woke up again. Here in Border Town, he at least had a house built out of soil brick. There was no fear of the falling temperature or the many days with snowfall. He also saw many ships filled with wheat docking at the pier, and then the wheat was moved in batches into the castle. Therefore, when he heard that the 4th Prince was recruiting a militia force, he directly registered himself. Of course, he had to give up his job as a gravel producer. But the temptation was too big. After all, they would get a monthly salary of 10 silver royals. This was comparable to a skilled mud artisan. He was no longer a young boy. He was only waiting until the spring of next year to marry his future wife Cheryl, a tavern maid. Now he had no problem to save some money. As for the requirements and the future tasks of the militia shown on the notice, he did not pay any attention to them. Anyway, it was to carry the burden of protecting the civilians on behalf of the Lord. They had to patrol along the city wall and keep the beasts from climbing up the wall, and withstand the crazy attacks of the demonic beasts. He had to go through a very strict screening process. Alone, the sight of some knights was enough to make people feel afraid. Fortunately, he had a sturdy physique and got through the review, but many scrawny guys were carried away by the knights. In the end, only 100 men were recruited. But he had never expected that the person who would train them would be His Royal Highness, the Prince himself. For their training, they were brought to a grass field west of border town. In the background, the city wall was being built, and in front of them was an unceasingly and continuously extending forest. The prince ordered everyone to line up, and then he went to the site to rest. Just a few days ago they had heavy rain, so the ground was still damp and muddy. The water infiltrated his shoes along the seam at the soles, which made his whole body feel uncomfortable. The stance they were ordered to take was not a normal one. Their hands needed to be aligned vertically, attached to the sides of their thighs, while their backs were required to be perfectly straight. Only a quarter of an hour later, they already felt terribly fatigued. This was even harder than breaking stone with a hammer. But he gritted his teeth and tried to hold on. After all, His Royal Highness had said before that those who moved would get no egg for lunch. God, it had been so long since he had eaten an egg. Apparently, all the people around him felt the same way. Although they staggered, most of them still endured. When the prince declared it was time to rest, he found out that his back was already drenched in sweat and the whole standing time wasn't even long, at most it was 3/4 of an hour. Those who couldn't persevere till the final moment were annoyed. It seemed as if they could see the eggs rolling away from them. He just didn't understand. Why did they have to practice this strange stance? Only standing was enough to get several bags of food? If it wasn't for His Royal Highness training them, he would have already stood up and begun to argue noisily. Unexpectedly, after a short break, the second command His Highness gave was even more eccentric. He asked all the people to continue standing in a line. This time, as long as all of them persevered till the end, they would all get another egg added for lunch. As long as there was a person who gave up, everyone would lose the opportunity to get an additional egg. He heard many people beside him swallowing their saliva. Hell, was this a popular game in the ranks of the nobility? Leading them all around with a carrot on a stick? Damn it, he was not a stupid donkey. But in the case that everyone was able to do it, wouldn't there be 2 eggs to eat? This was simply the devil's temptation. Wiping his overflowing saliva away, he decided to fight for the 2 eggs. Chapter 26, The Lessons Learned from History. Your Highness, what is the meaning of this? Before, Carter only thought that the prince merely acted arbitrarily and alone, but now he thought he had become whimsical. In the theory of how to train a soldier, the chief knight didn't think that there was a way more professional than their own. His family had a complete set of traditional training methods. From the age of 10 to 15 years, there would be only 5 years to develop the body and master all kinds of weapon used by a soldier. If they were trained for more than 5 years, then they would become a top soldier, known as a knight. Of course, the trainees cannot have a civilian background. Looking at the group of morons in front of him, who only had thoughts of eating eggs on their mind, Carter became angry. After all, eggs are expensive. Roland spoke directly into his ear. Take a good look and remember everything. This is the kind of training which should be performed in the next few days. Of course, some details will change. I will list them for you on a paper. In the age of cold weapons, were 2 or 3 months of training enough to train a group of good soldiers? Roland did not think about this question, and neither did he need one of those Spartan warriors, dressed in underpants, who could rip apart wild animals with their bare hands. The individual combat strength of Roland's people may not be strong, but they must be well disciplined and execute every order without fail. Most of the time the group's strength is more important than the individual strength. So, he needed them to quickly form a unit. To accomplish this task quickly and move over to military training for improving the current situation was the best choice. Out of his personal experience, he knew that 1 month would be enough to form a group of people from all over the country into a strong cohesive unit. Regardless of the process, the goal was clear. And when this group of people learned to follow orders, Roland could start to implement the next step of his plan. Asterisk. Danner ultimately failed to get a second egg to eat. This time, they had to stay double the amount of time of the previous round until someone's legs went weak and he could no longer persevere. Just at this time, the fourth prince allowed everyone to get some rest and then he ordered his attendants to serve lunch. This successfully transferred the anger from the weakling to the anticipation of eating. At this point, Danner started to suspect that His Highness probably had never intended to let them get a second egg. The lunch was packed in 4 huge barrels, which were carried by carriages out of town. In addition to the food, the carriages also contained many bowls and spoons. Danner licked his lips, ready to jump on the carriages. But he along with everyone else was stopped by the chief knight, who stood in front of them. His Royal Highness, the prince ordered everyone to line up in 4 rows and to come forward one by one to pick up their cutlery. Whoever disturbed the order would be forced to step back to the end of the line and get their food last. The rows were very noisy as everyone squeezed in to get a good position. Danner had very good luck, he stood in the forefront of the outermost row. Of course, some people expressed their intense resentment. So within the ranks, the sounds of people fighting with words and movements could be heard. Soon the knights and several guards rushed into the crowd picking out the rioters to be sent to the back of the line. Fool, thought Danner when he saw the man at the forefront of the rioters. He recognized him. He was the best street fighter in the town, also known as Insane Fist. He usually relied on brute force to stir up trouble everywhere. Now, only barehanded against knights and guards armed with swords, he gave of a pitiful picture. Look at his poor appearance now. He felt that he had already grasped His Highness's preference. That was to become a unit. Standing straight, side by side, the team had to form lines. Everyone had to line up to get something to eat, always keeping order, never stepping out. Danner had previously heard from a knowledgeable businessman that some of the nobility had a strange hobby. And that was that everything had to be arranged in order, everything which stood out would be forced back into place. In Danner's opinion, this kind of person was simply bored and had nothing better to do. So they would even deliberately find some trouble to occupy themselves. He had not expected that His Royal Highness would be such a person. When the lids of the barrels were opened, Danner could smell the strong aroma of the food. When the aroma scattered, he almost lost himself to temptation. The crowd also became restless, but simultaneously a roar to be quiet came from the chief knight. Danner thought that they probably had to line up again. Sure enough, the fourth prince had everyone get their cutlery first and then line up again to receive the food. Despite that, all of them had to swallow their saliva and hold back their stomachs which were growling. Given Insane Fist's example, they all stood quietly, waiting patiently for the food. The barrels were filled with hot wheat porridge. To Danner's surprise, he found that the porridge even contained jerky. While it was only a small piece of jerky, even then it was still meat. After he got his share of the porridge, he also got his wish, his egg. Danner almost wolfed down his food. It looked like he hadn't eaten for days, as he licked the bottom of his bowl again and again after finishing his food. He didn't even have the time to bite the egg, as he swallowed it whole, directly sending it into his stomach. Since he ate too fast and wasn't careful, his tongue developed blisters. After putting the empty bowl down, Danner patted his belly and happily belched. He hadn't enjoyed such a delicious meal in a long time. And even more incredible was that he actually felt a sense of satiety. Eating wheat porridge with black bread, even if compared to heaven, it couldn't be better. If he could eat like this every day, even fighting in the front lines against the demonic beasts would be worth it, right? After dinner, they all got a long period of time to rest. During this time everyone was brought back within the city walls, walking all the way to the camp of the town's patrol. A burly man with the rank of a ranger came out and began to teach them how to set up tents. Danner knew him, there was no one in town who did not know Iron Axe. His superb skill in archery left even the town's most experienced hunter thinking that it was at the acme of perfection. Wait a minute, since when did Iron Axe work for the fourth prince? It seemed that he had seen him staying at the side of the knights before. Banner frowned. In the end, what was His Royal Highness planning? He was a former citizen of the Sand Nation. Do you really intend to appoint a man of the Sand Nation as captain? Carter was holding this same question. He does not belong to Grey Castle. He is not even a person from our continent. Witches also do not belong to Grey Castle, Roland disagreed, but they all belong to Border Town. Besides, don't you see what's happening? But, Your Highness. Do not worry, Roland patted the knight's shoulder. In Border Town, we do not care about the origin of any person. As long as there is no violation of the law of the kingdom, they will all be my beloved subjects. You really don't have to worry. You can also pick 2 captains. Anyway, in the future, we will expand the number of teams, so it would not be bad to cultivate some promising talents now. Oh, that's right. I have already written down the training regulations. Compared to the people of the Sand Nation, I think you should be more concerned about this. Carter took the parchment from Roland's hands. Sweeping through its contents from the beginning to the end, he suddenly felt dizzy. The training content was simply unheard of. For example, in the afternoon everyone had to run laps around Border Town after eating lunch until the sun set. The regulations even emphasized that everyone had to do this, and that they were allowed to help each other on the way. If they persevered without giving up until the end, they would all get an additional egg for dinner. Another example was when at night the wolf whistles were blown, everyone had to report immediately. With these kinds of training exercises, he was afraid that most of them would toss from one side to the other side during the night. If the first few exercises were already hard to understand, then the last one left Carter feeling thoroughly confused. Every day after dinner, they all have to go to Mr. Carl's college to receive cultural training. Your Highness. What is the meaning of cultural training? Do they have to learn how to read and write? I would hope so, but the time is too short. Carl can only teach them a few simple words and numbers. This part, I will personally explain to Carl. You just need to send them over. But, why do you want to do this? Learning how to read and write will not be helpful for fighting the demonic beasts. Who said that? Roland had to yawn. A good unit must also be well educated. This is a lesson learned from history. Chapter 27. A friendly banter. Every day the weather was getting colder and colder, and every day Roland woke up later and later. As a member of the ruling class, he certainly had the right to lie longer in bed until late morning. In particular, every time he slept on his 3 velvet cushion blanket bed, he felt like he was falling into soft clouds. Dawdling in this kind of a feeling could help him to boost his mood. After Roland washed his face and rinsed his mouth, he stepped into his office, where Nightingale had already been waiting for him for a long time. Well, here is your breakfast. I already ate half of it while it was still hot. But now, it's cold, said Nightingale as she pouted and pointed toward the table on which less than half of the bread was left. Looking at this scene, it seemed as if she was the owner of this place and not Roland. Did no one teach you to be humble in the presence of a prince? Roland reached over to take the plates as he sat down at his desk. I still remember that in the beginning you took etiquette quite seriously. He sighed within his heart. He really had not thought that Nightingale would always be around him instead of accompanying Anna. It seemed as if she wasn't on a mission but taking a stroll in the sun instead. Before, she had always hid her figure. But now, as long as there were no outsiders around, she would openly show herself in the office, without even wearing her hood. Like this? She jumped off the table and gave a perfect noble bow. Recently, you've started to get up late. So, I thought eating your breakfast would help you solve this little problem, Your Highness. She leaned herself towards Roland. Anyway, you don't care, right? I can see that you do not like these tedious rituals. Her remark was spot on. Roland silently cursed her. Was there anything she didn't see? He sighed. Take the breakfast with you. After you begin to eat something, you have to finish it. I'll get another one if I want to eat. As you say, Your Highness. She gently smiled and went to put the plate at her side. Roland rolled out a blank parchment and began to finish the compliment design he had drawn partway. If he wanted to hold Border Town, it wouldn't be that easy after having a tragic victory in their first fight, so he had to do something. On top of that, his new troops had never seen blood. So Roland was worried that once large losses occurred, his newly trained troops wouldn't be able to bring up the courage to stand on the walls. He needed the weapons of his era to gain an absolute advantage over the demonic beasts. Without a doubt, guns would help. In fact, this era had all the conditions for guns to appear. Alchemists often created a powder, which was called snow powder, and was used for court celebrations. But this snow powder had the wrong recipe to be used as gunpowder. It was slow burning and its explosion was more exaggerated than the damage it did. In the next 100 years, the prototype of guns, usable for war, will probably appear. Such firearms, because of their complicated operation, would require the collaboration of two people to shoot. Under normal circumstances they were only used as a single-shot weapon. But in terms of rate of fire and power, they were still not comparable with those of a well-trained archer. Roland was certainly not interested in a repeat of history. With the help of the steam engine and the ability of the witches, he could create guns which had real value. I saw the purchasing order on the table when you were asleep. Nightingale swallowed the last piece of bread, and then casually asked, "What do you plan to do with so much ice?" "It's winter. If you want to drink frozen ale, you only need to put it outside the house, so why would you buy extra ice?" The upper nobility liked to use ice in the summer. They used it together with saltpeter to enjoy cold milk, fruit juice, or wine. Since now was the time of the cold season, the price for the acquisition of saltpeter was very low. "To make iced cheese, the current temperature isn't low enough," answered Roland. Although the woman in front of him wasn't an enemy, he could not tell her everything like he did to Anna. The steam engine was something different, but things like firearms didn't require such a high level of technological understanding. Once spread out, their distribution could no longer be controlled. As long as he didn't know what kind of a person she was, it would be better to keep some things a secret from her. When he thought till here, he said imploringly to Nightingale, "Does the Witch Cooperation Association not only search for the Holy Mountain but also train witches as assassins?" "No, they just swarm together in order to find the cure to end their pitiful life." Nightingale waved her hand dismissively. "I joined the Witch Cooperation Association, but that was only 2 years ago." "In other words, you were working for someone else before?" Her excellent knife-throwing skills were a product of years of hard training and good instruction, so Roland could confirm that. "So apart from me, there are also other people who are willing to shelter witches?" "Shelter?" Nightingale's face became a little strange. "How could?" "If he had known that I was a witch, he wouldn't even let me through his door. I'm afraid he would have killed me in secret if I had stayed with him after exposing it to him." "Oh? Can you tell me more?" Nightingale smiled and shook her head, but this time the smile contained many unknown emotions. "Your Highness, you have to wait until the time is right before I tell you. I know what you are anxious about, but please rest assured. 5 years ago I got my freedom, and now I no longer need to work for anyone else." His verification test failed. It seemed that his charm points were not high enough. But her answers confirmed at least one of his presumptions. At least 5 years ago, she was a person who was involved in some shady business. Fortunately, it seemed that teaching and using Nightingale was apparently a coincidence, and her former employer was not like himself, who intended to employ a large number of witches. Roland did not pursue this point any further as he bent over his drawing to finish it instead. After some time, he was a little bit surprised that the usually talkative Nightingale had now become quiet, and the only sound in the room was that of the fire burning. By the time Roland raised his head to stretch his sore neck, he could not detect any sign of her in the office. "To walk out without saying anything," he muttered, as he folded the parchment in his hands and put it into his personal pocket. The next days he was busy with drawing the weapons designs or testing the already finished designs. His intention was to make the famous flintlock firearm. This kind of weapon was already tested through history. The difficulty was to make a gun similar to a harquebus. First the gunpowder had to be inserted and then the lead ball was to be loaded. The firing rate was close to 3 rounds per minute, so it really didn't require much skill in order to deal with the demonic beasts. Most of the demonic beasts couldn't climb the walls, so the shooting distance was approximately equal to the height of the walls, which was 12 feet. At this distance, even with a bad aim, it should be possible to hit the beasts, and the lead ball would also not lose much of its power. If only the skin of the demonic beasts evolved to be as hard as steel, then they could be easily shot and killed. The disadvantage laid in the production time of a flintlock. It started with the matchlock. The smith had to slowly hammer it into form from the barrel to the trigger. The entire production of a gun would take about 3 months, wherein the barrel needed the largest part of it. First, it had to be beaten into a thin and cylindrical shape, and then the spiral grooves could be engraved. Although without the right equipment it was quite sophisticated, but it should still be possible for a well-learned blacksmith to make a good barrel. This was also one of the reasons that Roland created the steam engine first. With the steam engine, he could use a steel drill to bore the drill directly into the solid iron, so with this the production speed could significantly be increased. He didn't need a master blacksmith to do the work, he only needed one table on which he could affix the barrel. Chapter 28 Fierce Scar. When Roland tried to change the theory into practice, he discovered that it wasn't as easy as he imagined. In the backyard after 4 or 5 days, the production of a harder drill was successful. It was easily quiet since he could use the high-temperature flame from Anna, which could easily get above 1,500 degrees, and was enough to melt iron. Without needing to think about temperature control, and using the conventional method of producing steel, it was easy and quickly possible to make a small quantity of steel bars, namely the high-speed stirring of iron clubs with molten iron. The excess carbon and other impurities in the pig iron would oxidize when coming into contact with the air. By repeating this several times, before letting the molten iron cool down, it was possible to get high-quality steel. The problem laid within the steam engine. The worked-up noise and vibration by his prototype of the steam engine was very impressive. Even when stabilizing the drill it was impossible to complete a pipe. When doing heavy work or menial jobs, this degree of tremor didn't matter, but processing a gun barrel was clearly not possible. If he wanted to improve the steam engine, he would have to create a centrifugal mechanics governor to control the output power of the steam engine, and then he could reduce the tremor by using gears to adjust the rotation speed of the drill. And he need a simple lathe machining gear. With all this in mind, Roland simply found no way to achieve this goal while preparing for the coming months of the demons. In the end, he could only use the old-fashioned way, and let a blacksmith hammer the drill into the barrel. But the plan to mass-produce firearms was impossible. According to the number of smithies in Border Town, it was only possible to produce 3 to 4 root barrels each month, but only in the case that he stopped the production of the second steam engine. The only good news was that didn't have to worry about the quality of the barrels. The blacksmith only had to knock out a rough pipe, and then Anna could do the unifying commissure. Her work was seamless and so good that it basically eliminated the risk of a barrel explosion. So Roland had no choice but to change his former plan. He had intended to recruit hunters from Border Town, who would then form a rifle team. Most of them were proficient in archery with either a bow or crossbow, both were handy weapons. In addition, they only need a short amount of time to train with the firearms, so they could be quickly sent into combat. But now with only 4 guns produced before the months of the demons, he could only pick the most outstanding hunters and had no manpower to build up an elite group. Roland decided to let Iron Axe handle this matter. He already spent 15 years in Border Town, so he should know who the best hunters are. Asterisk. For the last month, Brian was unhappy. Especially when he met the militia in the street, his unsatisfied feeling would be doubled. He even felt a trace of loathing. He felt His Highness had forgotten him. A month ago when he was called by the chief knight, he was full of excitement. He would have close contact with the 4th prince, and get orders directly from His Royal Highness. How fortunate and glorious would that be? He grew up in Border Town, and although he born from a common hunting family, by virtue of his ability he was able to get a place as town patrol. He knew he could not rely on his family background to become a knight, but instead could only wait for the opportunity to get enough merits to receive the honor of becoming a knight. His Highness asked him what he knew about the demonic beasts, so he was apparently unwilling to give up his own territory during the winter. He was trying to find ways to fight the demonic beasts. Later, the wantonly built walls also proved that there was no doubt that this year they would spend the months of the demons in Border Town. If he wanted to stop the invasion of the demonic beasts here, we would have to set up a front-fighting team. Brian thought that he himself was a good candidate. He was proficient in investigating, fencing, and riding, and in the last year he was even the last person in Border Town who ignited the flames, proving that he did not lack courage, but he had never expected that His Highness intended to elect a team from the civilian population to fight against the demonic beasts. Yes, a purely civilian team, and not just him, but the entire patrol team of 10 people were not accepted during the review by the Chief Knight. This was simply incredible. Did His Highness think that these people, who had never held a sword, would be better at fighting than his own town patrol? He was afraid that when they got to see the evil beast's fierce appearance, they would instantly collapse. But His Highness seemed to be serious. He not only trained the mob, but even gave them a uniform and many other clothes. Every afternoon Brian could see this group of people dressed up in a brown and gray leather armor. They were arranged in 2 columns running down the street. In the beginning, they were lacking any order, but recently they had become neater and neater. While he himself still had to perform his boring task every day, he couldn't see any possibility of promotion now. When he was tossing and turning at night, he could hear a sound at his door, then the door opened and someone came in quietly. "Hey, we are up," whispered a person in a low voice. Brian could tell to whom this voice belonged. It belonged to a member of his own patrol, nicknamed Fierce Scar. In his room slept 5 people. In addition to himself and Greyhound, the other 3 quickly stood up, and they seemed well prepared. They hadn't even taken off their coats. "Captain, get up, I have something important to tell you." In Longsong Stronghold, Fierce Scar had a noble relative, who had not heard of his great noble uncle. So thanks to this, he had a high status within the team. It was not good for Brian to ignore him, so he had to climb up and ask, "What happened?" Greyhound also woke up. It's so late, why don't you sleep, aren't you sleepy? I have the greatest job in your lives to introduce to you. You want to be canonized as a knight, right?" What? Knight? Greyhound was surprised. Brian's heart jumped wildly, and he quickly asked, "In the end, what is the job?" "You all know my Uncle Hill. He isn't only the herald of Duke Ryan, even more, he is one of his confidants. This is news he himself personally confessed to me." Fierce Scar spoke with a low voice. The 4th prince preparing to shake off the shackles from Longsong Stronghold made Duke Ryan very unhappy. He has decided to let the prince know who the true owner of the western border is. Difficult, don't, your plan, assassination." Greyhound was so nervous he even begun to stammer, and he didn't even speak a complete sentence. "How would that be possible?" Fierce Scar laughed maniacally. "After all, he is a prince. If we kill him, not even Duke Ryan could shelter us. I said this is your biggest chance in your life." Brian felt subconsciously that the deal was certainly not as simple as he claimed it to be, but the temptation to be canonized as a knight was too great. He could not help himself and opened his mouth. "Begin to talk, we are listening." "Food." If he has no food, he can only humble himself and go back to Longsong Stronghold where Duke Ryan already promised him a place. As long as we can successfully burn the food, which the 4th prince had previously bought, Duke Ryan will organize the canonization ceremony for us, and will give each of us fiefdom east of Longsong Stronghold. This is a golden opportunity, Captain, what do you think? Why, you are crazy. Now, hadn't His Royal Highness astrologer said that this year months of the demons would likely hold on for more than 4 months? If we set the food on fire, if we burn it all, what would we eat? Greyhound again and again shook his head. 2 years ago, there was a great famine. Has everyone forgotten it? What does it have to do with us? Asked another person disdainfully. Anyway, I do not intend to stay here. If we do the job for Duke Ryan, we can live a comfortable life in the stronghold. Yes, do you want to eat this hell of slag for a lifetime, do you? Other people began to chime in. Hell, they already colluded at an earlier time. Brian's heart became cold, and in addition, except Greyhound, most of them were from outside of border town. They came from all over the kingdom and they don't have any nostalgia with this town. Feeling powerless to stop them, Brian had to change the subject, but the purchased wheat was transferred to His Royal Highness Castle, and all the doors are guarded by His Highness Knights. How could you go through with your plan? That's why I need your help. Fierce Scar smiled proudly. From an early age you have stayed in this broken place, so no one is more familiar with the environment here than you. I remember that you once said that there is a ravine in an abandoned well, and its end is connected with the castle's water supply. Through it, we can silently enter the castle garden. Didn't you find it when you were still a child? How is it? With this easy task, you can become a knight in the future, a knight personally canonized by Duke Ryan. A knight should not do any injustice. Instead, he should have the courage to fight against it, and he should not be afraid of any danger, and should always be ready to protect the weak. For Duke Ryan's personal gains, the residents of his hometown would face the threat of hunger and death. Becoming a knight like this, there was no glory at all. He refused to open his mouth, but Greyhound began to shout. You are a group of maniacs. You're actually thinking about the idea of burning the food. I would never let you leave this place. I will report it. Report to, Greyhound only spoke until here. His voice suddenly became weaker. With an incredible look he turned around, looking at a former teammate standing behind him and sneering at him. A black dagger was inserted in Greyhound's waist. The dagger was totally inserted into the body. Greyhound shivered twice. He opened his mouth and tried to say something, but he could only emit a hoarse breathing sound. The other guard stirred his dagger twice, and then he abruptly withdrew it. Greyhound, like a doll who suddenly lost its support, softly crumbled to the ground. How? Fierce Scar was suddenly so close to Brian that the latter could even feel the foul breath exhaled from his mouth. I think you have made a decision, right, Captain Brian? Chapter 29 Fury. The castle in border town hadn't always stood in the place it stood now. When they laid the foundation for the first castle, the ground collapsed due to an underground cave. Because of this, the castle position had been moved. The already excavated sewers were mostly destroyed in the collapse, and some parts were still intact, but these parts were also discarded because of the relocation and redevelopment of the castle. When Brian was still young, he often played in these underground tunnels, and one day he accidentally found a route from an abandoned well outside the castle wall that directly led to a well in the castle garden. Brian told the news of this discovery to his father, but he got a severely beating in return. His father also warned him that trespassing into the Lord's castle was a capital offense. In the case that he was found, it could only end with a journey to the gallows. Through this, Brian was frightened for his life and never went into the old sewers again. However, when people get together they will start to drink and chat, and during such occasions he had repeatedly boasted about his own ability to have direct access to the castle. Now he was extremely regretting it. The entire town's patrol apart from Greyhound were 9 men. In other words, Fierce Scar had convinced the entire town's patrol, and they were now working for Duke Ryan, who was in control of the western part of the kingdom. Furthermore, the rewards were so good that presumably only very few people could withstand this temptation. The abandoned well was in the part of the place which collapsed in the beginning, and it was still a wasteland even today. Fierce Scar ordered Brian with his sword to lead the way, and during the whole time on their way to the well Brian was caught in the middle of the group. The fairly spacious waterways he could remember from his childhood had now become very narrow. Because nobody went through this way, the water diversion had dug many holes in which have grown many vines. The guy who stabbed Greyhound was leading the way at the forefront and holding a torch. In the other hand he held a hatchet to clear the way of all obstacles. While Brian pretended to recall the road, in the bottom of his heart, he secretly thought on a way to escape. But for such actions, this was clearly a very inconvenient place. Here he had no possibility of escaping. Only in the castle, there was the possible to obtain a slim chance. But how should he do it? Should he cry out loud to lead His Highness guards to them? No, that was a bad idea. Fierce Scar only had to raise his hand and he would be able to take Brian's own life. He had to get away from him, otherwise his fate would be like that of Greyhound. When thinking about Greyhound, Brian's eyes became somewhat gloomy. Before Border Town had been established, he and Brian himself were already living here. They grew up and played many times together, and even joined the town's patrol together, which was Brian's idea. Greyhound had never expected that he himself would be elected as captain of the patrol. Brian had been happy for him for a long time, but because of his stuttering, Greyhound had suffered much contempt. But today, he finally had the chance to be recognized. At last an opportunity arrived, thought Brian. But when Greyhound went down and Fierce Scar snarled towards Brian, Fierce Scar sarcastically told him directly to his face the true reason why everyone elected Greyhound as captain. Fool, he was elected because an important job of the captain is to stay behind during the months of the demons and take care of things, like igniting the flames to ring the alarm. We let you do this, because why should I do such a dangerous task? This sentence was like a sharp knife, directly stabbing into Brian's ear. So those who modestly declined when they got the offer for promotion. Those congratulations words were so false, their true reason was so ugly. He showed a look of shock and despair across his face, to cover up the raging anger within his heart. This was simply inexcusable, Brian secretly raged, someone must pay the price for this. After walking for half an hour through the dried sewer, the crowd finally could hear the sound of flowing water. This meant that they weren't far away from their destination. After they turned around a corner, the front was suddenly a lot more open and bright. The open place could accommodate 2 people standing side by side. The person moving in front of the group said, "There is no road ahead, it's the mouth of the shaft." "What now?" asked Fierce Scar while poking Brain with the sword. "Tell him to look up," Brian narrated, "we have finally arrived." This abandoned channel was just in the middle of the castle sewer. At the time of the repairs, maybe due to negligence, they didn't seal this interface. Fierce Scar stuck close to the wall and took a probing look. At his feet the rushing water was 3 feet deep, and when he looked upwards he was able to see the night sky through a small hole. He led other people of him to look at Brian, and he took his backpack and pulled out a bundle of rope, fastened a hook to it and gently tossed it up, only to hear the sound of the hook firmly sticking to edge of the wellhead. Fierce Scar followed the rope, cautiously climbing out. Soon, he tugged at the rope from above and the other people schematically went up. After a long wait, it was finally Brian's turn to climb up the well. Originally, they could only see the cast far into the distance, but now stood right in front of them. Fierce Scar grabbed Brian and ordered silently, "You're coming with us to the warehouse." Brian had only been here once. Although in his memory the look of the castle had become blurred, he still knew where they were. If they forced open the nearest door to the well, they would directly enter the castle. At this time most of the people in the castle had already gone to sleep, and the oil lamp hanging at the wall of the corridor had already been extinguished, too. In the darkness, someone had to light a fire. The weak fire illuminated only a radius of a few feet, but Brian was waiting for his chance, which would certainly come. When the team came to a fork in the road leading to the basement, he aimed for the stairway leading downwards, and suddenly rushed past his guards. The guards at Brian's side were caught off guard. Despite paying attention to every movement he did, Brian just jumped too fast, so they had not a chance to respond, but soon they reacted and jumped down after him. He fell down the stairs, out of the range of the light, and disappeared into the darkness. "Oh shit, damn it." Fierce Scar immediately pulled out his dagger and jumped down to catch up. He thought that Brian would take advantage of the darkness and would play hide and seek with him, so he was caught off guard when Brian didn't escape. He instead stood patiently at the end of the stairs as if he was waiting for him. Fierce Scar noted that his other accomplices were already lying motionless on the ground, and in Brian's hands were the men's weapon. "Idiot, do you think you have a chance of winning against me?" Fierce Scar took on an alert posture, and he could also hear his other men coming down the steps. "We have 7 people, and you are alone." Brian did not answer. It was already needless to constrain his own fury any longer. He brought up his sword and quickly slashed diagonally downwards, hitting Fierce Scar's sword, instantly creating sparks. Before Fierce Scar could even take his next defense posture, Brian's sword tip had already pierced his shoulder. Fierce Scar gave off a pained roar, and took a step back to let another man step forward, blocking Brian's pursuit. This was an excellent place for Brian to fight. With narrow aisles his opponents could simply not take advantage of their superior numbers. He just stood in the center of the corridor and had only the enemies in front of him. He would be able to hold off two people, who had to fight with their swords side by side. In fencing, Brian would not lose confidence against anyone in the patrol. When these group of lazy scumbags were gambling and indulging in a bar, he was still honing his combat skills, regardless of wind, frost, rain, and snow, unbroken through the whole years. This was his choice and the reason why he didn't shout for help immediately. He wanted to personally avenge Greyhound. Chapter 30 Out of the Fog. The substitute for Fierce Scar came forward to merely receive two fast attacks from Brian before getting his sword swept away. They were not much of a town patrol, it would be more correct to call them a group of bullies. Thinking this fueled Brian's anger even more. In addition to extortion and blackmail, what else did these people do? Greyhound and Brian had carried out the tasks given by the Lord without any loose threads, but the ranks beneath them were a completely different category. But it was this group of trash who would be the group taking refuge in the stronghold. This scum, the scourge of the two who even dared to kill Greyhound by employing an extremely despicable method. This was unforgivable. His sword slashed towards his frightened opponent and cut his neck off, but just in this moment, a shadow which stuck behind his former target's back attacked Brian's heart in the blink of an eye. The blow was too subtle, so when Brian noticed it, it was already too late to parry. In a desperate act, he violently threw himself backwards to the ground, and at the same time while he was falling backwards, he felt a stabbing pain in his chest region. After two rolls backwards, he immediately stood up again and took a defensive posture. Brian was lucky that the sneak attack just now had only pierced his coat and skin, and didn't cause any heavy injury. The key was to stab at a man's weak point with the sword. From the impression he had of his own patrol members, he was sure that none of them had fencing skills. Huh? You actually escaped. The man kicked the lost weapons of his dead teammates away, and step by step came forward towards Brian. What the hell? Brian found himself unable to recognize the other one. He was not a tall man, but his hands were too big in comparison to his body. When his arms were hanging down from his sides, his hands almost reached his knees. His eyes were so strange, Brian could swear that he had never seen this pair of eyes. You are not a member of the town patrol. Who the hell are you? Although 5 of the 10 members from the town patrol were living next door and he rarely dealt with them, he could still always recognize these people. So this guy obviously replaced one of them and followed the team on their way into the castle. The fact that he didn't previously see him on their way into the castle was not surprising. After all, the night was pitch black. However, there was no reaction from the group of Fierce Scar. Since they regarded him without surprise, there was only one possibility: this guy was previously arranged for by Fierce Scar. You can guess the answer. Why do you need to ask me? He replied while smiling indifferently. Anyway, you are going to die soon. Damn, he hurt me. Fierce Scar bitterly flamed. Viper, quickly chop off his hands and feet. I want to slowly bathe in his blood. Unfortunately, Mr. Hill, I must give priority to the completion of the task given to me by my lord. Just like his name, this guy was really the incarnation of a serpent. He would always attack from a strange and tricky angle, in addition to his extremely long arm span. He directly forced Brian into a bitter struggle. Brian was forced back again, and he could never find an opportunity to counterattack. He was just too careless. In his heart, Brian could feel some anxiety welling up. He had already fought so long in this underground walkway, so the guards above should have already noticed the fight, right? He had originally intended to personally avenge Greyhound, but now he could only hope to live a little bit longer, waiting for the night guards of His Highness to come break the siege of these villains. You seem to be waiting for something. Viper suddenly suspended his attacks. I guess you're waiting for the prince's knights to come rescue you. Unfortunately, this stone castle is differently built from the common pubs and brothels. It's only a matter of time before those wooden shacks break down. But this door here, even if you tear out your throat while shouting, the people behind would never hear any sound. When Brain heard the reason, he could not help himself and hesitated for a moment. This was exactly the opportunity Viper had been waiting for. He slashed with his sword downwards, pressing Brian's sword down, and paralyzing him in his movements. Then he slightly raised his other hand and triggered the hidden hand crossbow in his sleeve. A one-finger-long bolt shot from the cuff, and when Brian heard the humming sound of the mechanism, the bolt had already pierced into his lungs. Suddenly an unbearable pain exploded within his chest. Brian threw his sword in Viper's direction and then turned back and ran. However, his pulmonary blood was seeping quickly into his trachea and made it difficult for him to breathe. He really couldn't run far. He tripped over a threshold, took some staggering steps, and fell heavily to the ground. Viper soon caught up. He wanted to end this fight quickly, but was held back by Fierce Scar. "Let me do it," hissed Fierce Scar through his gritted teeth. "I want to kill this guy. After all, he stabbed me." A cold look flashed through Viper's eyes, but in the end, he still stepped aside. "But do it fast, and do not forget that we still have other business down here." Fierce Scar grabbed Brian's hair and growled at him, "Believe me, you will die slowly and very painfully." Brian wanted to spit into Fierce Scar's face, but his body's strength flowed away like water into a bottomless hole. He did not know how much longer he could live on. The regrets of his life came into his mind, such as not yet meeting his wife and not fulfilling his dream to become a knight. But what he regretted the most was that he didn't avenge Greyhound. Wait, what was that? He blinked once and suddenly there was a woman sitting on the lid of a box. Although within this dark light, he couldn't see her appearance clearly, but with such an exquisite body there was no doubt that she was a woman. Hell, was this an illusion? It has to be. He fell into this room at midnight, and there was definitely not anyone inside. Could it be that God in heaven had heard his complaints and specially made this fantasy to comfort him? "Hey, you're playing so lively in someone else's place and even intend to kill someone in front of my face. I'm afraid this isn't appropriate, right?" Fierce Scar saw something flickering at the edge of his view, so he abruptly let go of Brian's hair. He took his sword out of its scabbard and turned to her while hearing that several other members of his team were doing the same. "Who are you?" Why would they too respond to her? Wait, with his dim consciousness Brian began to think, what if what he was seeing wasn't an illusion? "Of course, I'm here." The woman jumped from the box, bent over and patted the dust off her gown. In the dim firelight, Brian could see strange patterns embroidered on her robe, 3 juxtaposed triangles, and set in the center was a huge eye. The contour of the eye, when illuminated by the fire, seemed a bit golden. "Why are you here? Sneaking through the sewers like rats?" Her voice was clear and sweet, but her face showed no emotions. This was an anomaly. Anyone seeing such a murder scene shouldn't be so calm. Viper was aware of this point. He looked solemn as he slowly turned around to face the new opponent and suddenly attacked with a piercing strike. The woman didn't look concerned as she casually waved her hand. But Viper didn't even see her arms moving, he only felt a cold wind blowing through his body. Seeing such an unbelievable sight, Fierce Scar could only stare in disbelief. He rushed forward to help Viper, but he could see that he came too late for Viper because the place where his arm normally was already empty. Along with his falling arm and sword, Viper dropped to the ground. Seeing this, Fierce Scar was overwhelmed by fright and could feel a strangling pressure in his throat. Others did not know, but he knew very well the ins and outs of Viper. Vicious, cunning, and very dangerous. This was his uncle's evaluation of Viper. He could recruit other people, he held absolute strength, and should never be underestimated. It was even difficult for Brian to hold off Viper's attacks for half a quarter of an hour. But now, he had been casually blown away by a woman, and even got his whole arm cut off. Everyone don't stupidly stand around. "Go and kill her," shouted Viper while pressing on his wounds. Due to his excessive bleeding, Brian's vision began to blur. He could only hear chaotic footsteps, sounds from weapons clashing, as well as the sound of bodies hitting the ground everywhere around him. Then, everything became muffled. In the end, what happened? He tried to turn his head, and looked in the direction of the fight. What he saw then was a picture which was too difficult to understand. The woman was just like a ghost, walking in and out of the crowd however she wanted, vanishing out of sight again and again. Every one of her attacks would penetrate the enemy's vitals. It wasn't possible to call it a fight, it would be better to say she was dancing. He had never seen anyone able to wield murderous weapons while having such a sense of rhythm, slaying high and low, drawing an inconceivable path. In contrast, the people around her were nothing more than a group of clumsy clowns. They tried to fight back, only to fall in vain. In the end, only she was left standing, proud and independent. That was the last scene he saw, before he lost his consciousness. Chapter 31. Our Friend. Roland was sitting at his desk in a dazed state. He actually didn't expect that someone was trying to commit murder in his castle. He was afraid that if Nightingale hadn't promptly discovered them, they would have murdered him in cold blood. Who ordered this assassination attempt? Was it his third sister, or one of his other siblings? Why were they doing this? It was a 5-year struggle for the throne, but in the past few months they had already tried to kill him twice. Roland, full of irritation, banged his desk. This was simply outrageous. Couldn't they just let him face the months of the demons? Footsteps could be heard from outside of the door. It was Carter, his chief knight. After he pushed open the door he said, "Your Highness, the identities of the deceased have been identified. From the 8 bodies, 7 were original members of the patrol, but the last one is still unidentified. In addition, there are 2 who are still alive and under the care of the witch, if not. After being treated by Miss Pine, they have yet to wake up. Also the path to the sewers is being closely guarded now." They were from the town patrol? He knew that the team raised by the former lord wasn't reliable. Roland gritted his teeth. Actually, 8 from the 10 people were disloyal, so not letting them join the militia was really the right choice. "That is good, and also make sure they are always well guarded, don't let them commit suicide like the last time." "Like, the last time?" "Oh, nothing." Roland shook his head. Apparently due to Nightingale's early wake-up call, his head was still confused. "Anyway, I want to know everything about them. Who is their leader? Who is their contact person? Who is their investor? You must investigate all of this and more." "Yes, Your Highness." Carter had gotten his orders, but he did not leave immediately. Instead he went down on one knee and said, "That the assassins could sneak into the castle was my dereliction of duty. I hope Your Highness will punish me. Enough is enough. At that time you weren't even in the castle, so this has nothing to do with you." "Well," Carter hesitated, "can you tell me who it was in the end that prevented this assassination attempt? I could see from the scene that the knight had to swallow. All of them seemed to have been killed by the same person and were totally defenseless." "That you can tell?" Roland was curious. "If they were evenly matched, the scene wouldn't be so clean and the wounds would be in a wide range all over the bodies," Carter whispered. "Everybody was killed down in the small warehouse. In addition to blood and dead bodies there was nothing else on the ground. There was almost no damage to the goods placed down there. Those big boxes, which store bacon, didn't even have a sword cut. That shows that the man didn't need to use any cover. It seems as if he was taking a walk in a small clearing. With all due respect, Your Highness, this is just too incredible." "So that's the reason." Roland nodded his head. He understood the meaning of Carter's explanation. After a theoretically strong person was surrounded, he would fall into an extreme adverse situation. Real fights usually didn't end like what was shown in movies, where the surrounded person sends one enemy after the other towards the ground. An attack from a blind spot would be particularly deadly. So to fight many, the correct approach would be to rely on the terrain and the environment so that they could always face the opposition. But Nightingale was not one of those ordinary people. "No matter what you do, you have to complete the mission I gave you, first. This person cannot be revealed yet, but when the time comes, I'll tell you. Although he knew that the chief knight was one of his loyal and reliable subordinates, and that he also knew that Nana and Anna were witches, but Roland still chose to hide the presence of Nightingale from him, because the difference between her and the other two witches was that she didn't belong to their side. She only stayed in Border Town because of Anna. She belonged to the Witch Association Cooperation, and would sooner or later leave this town. Carter gave a salute and retired. Roland could understand his thoughts. As a person well versed with the sword, Carter constantly practiced a training program that was produced from summarizing and accumulating fighting techniques for hundreds of years, and in truth they were proud of their heritages. But when he saw the scene in the warehouse, he couldn't believe it and began to have doubts, if swordplay could be perfected to such a state, of which heritage were they normally so proud of? "I thought you would tell me to come out," Nightingale revealed herself. She was still sitting on the corner of his desk, with crossed legs. "I also thought about it." "How about it?" "You can just settle down here as my hidden sword. You will get 2 gold royals as monthly salary, the double of what Anna gets. What do you think?" Roland began to advise it further. "You will get a house with a garden, 2 days off each week, and even paid leave every year. That's it, the rest would only be a monetary reward." To his surprise, Nightingale didn't flatly refuse him. She only smiled and said neither yes or no. "I cannot abandon my companions, no matter what. That would be now, but when the winter is over, Border Town will begin a time of reconstruction. And at that time, how many people will still care about it? And then, the witches will no longer have to suffer discrimination while walking in the streets. No one will see you as the devil's spokesperson." And so on. "You are always talking about it," said Nightingale indifferently. It was time to stop. It was always better to see than to hear. This kind of thing could only be changed slowly. Roland changed the subject. "Nana has been safely sent back, right?" "Ah yes, but she got spooked." Roland sighed. It couldn't be helped, after all, it was midnight when she had been woken up by Nightingale. When she was brought to the scene and saw the battle place, she almost threw up. Nightingale gave him a short account about the things which happened, and then he told her to get Nana. Usually, Nana had to only heal chickens. But now, when the little girl saw people covered in blood, she immediately fainted. After a short while, she woke up and began to heal the person from the town patrol with her face full of tears. In order to keep Nana's family in the dark, Nightingale was also responsible for taking her back. When everything was settled, it was almost daybreak. "How was the investigation? Could you figure out which of my good brothers or sisters sent them?" Nightingale shook her head. "They were all people of your own patrol, with only one exception, but he also didn't carry any identity-related evidence with him. With enough money, anyone could hire them. But I think that this perhaps isn't related to your siblings." "Why?" "Because it was extremely unorganized. During multiple occasions, the team actually had a lot infighting. And immediately after their failure, they didn't commit suicide, leaving at least 2 people alive. And then, they had no professional performance. In general, they were just street punks. This is unlike the style of your brothers and sisters. It is more likely that it was a layman's plan. I think that even if I wasn't here there was no way their assassination attempt would have succeeded. Don't forget that Anna is sleeping downstairs." Nightingale reached for Roland's cup. She didn't seem to care about drinking from the same cup as him, and then said, "No matter what, your knight had asked for the truth of what happened in the sewers, and I bet he will soon know the truth. Compared with the former piece of your sister, that guy is much less professional. If I hadn't left, he would still kneel before me begging me to not to kill him. That seriously injured patrol member, it seems that he is the one I summoned not too long ago." "Really?" Nightingale tilted her head. "I think that you'll have to reward him. If he hadn't stood up against the other guys, I would not have found them so quickly and they would have slipped into the basement of the castle. Although it is still not clear why he did that, but the enemy's enemy is our friend, right?" Yes, Roland thought, but the important part was not if he is a friend or foe, but rather that Nightingale said the 2 words. Our friend. Chapter 32 Night. When Brian woke up, the first thing that caught his eyes was the white ceiling. The sunlight shining through the window was somewhat bright, so he had to close his eyes a little. Then when his eyes got used to the sunlight, he opened them again, only to find the scene in front of him unchanged. Feeling that it wasn't a dream, he thought, I'm still alive? He tried to move his body, but soon noticed that he could only lift his fingers a little bit. It seemed that his whole body's strength was gone. Then he heard someone shouting. He woke up. Go and inform His Highness. His Highness? Brian felt like his brain was filled with paste and that his thought process was many times slower than usual. By the way, what happened after I fainted? I can only remember that viper pierced my chest and that I was dying, and in my last moment I could see a ghostly woman who defeated all the enemies in an incredible way. Soon a maid arrived to help him up so that he could sit in the bed. Then another maid came holding a basin and sat down next to him and immediately began to help him clean his face. In his whole life, Brian had never experienced such comprehensive personal service, plus the maids were all young women, which made the situation really awkward for him. Fortunately, the situation did not last long. As soon as the fourth prince entered the room, everyone else left. Brian could feel a surging heat within his heart. He had too much to ask, but then, when he tried to open his mouth he didn't know from where to begin. But contrary to what he had expected, Roland nodded and said, I already know of all your past achievements, and Brian, you are worthy of the title of a hero. Hearing the word hero, Brian suddenly felt his eyes begin to tear up. He began to sob and his voice choked. No. Your Highness, my friend, is the real. Roland patted him on his shoulder so as to comfort him. It was exactly like Nightingale had predicted. After Fierce Scar was dragged into the torture chamber, he began to tell everything he knew before the warden even put his hands on him. The one behind this group was not his sister or any other of his siblings, but Longsong Stronghold's Elk family. Count Elk got in contact with his distant relative Hiller Dimitri. Afterwards, Fierce Scar gained control over most of the town patrol with the lure of a reward. In addition, he also sent an assassin to replace one of the members in the team to prevent an accident from occurring in the course of action. The purpose of this group of people was not to assassinate Roland like he had thought. Instead they intended to burn the food reserves so that he would obediently go back to the stronghold. Their conspiracy resulted in the death of an innocent person, Greyhound. He tried to stop Fierce Scar when he heard of his criminal intent, but he was stabbed to death with a dagger by one of his own subordinates. The whereabouts of the patrol member who was replaced by Viper was unknown. When he didn't see fire on the castle ground and noticed that Fierce Scar failed to come back, he probably realized that the plan was discovered and fled. To help stabilize Brian's mood, Roland promised him, your friend Greyhound, he'll get a funeral fitting for his sacrifice, and his family will be properly cared for. They will no longer need to worry about food in the future. Thank you, Your Highness. Brian took a deep breath. I have to know. Fierce Scar, is he dead? No, he is still alive. Brian painfully closed his eyes. He would rather have had them not rescue Fierce Scar so that he would have been dragged to hell than both of them staying alive. But now, the chance to fulfill his wish became slim. There was no doubt that Fierce Scar was guilty, but the sins committed by nobility could always be redeemed with money. As long as his uncle was willing to protect him, it was very likely that Fierce Scar wouldn't die. It was most probable that he wouldn't even need to go to prison. Roland could naturally guess his thoughts. Hiller Dimitri, the uncle of Fierce Scar, is also a distant relative of the Elk family in Longsong Stronghold. The head of the family is Luke Dimitri, a vassal under Duke Ryan, but the fact that he is the distant uncle of Fierce Scar, here he paused for a little moment, will not affect the final verdict. Fierce Scar has been sentenced to death by hanging, and there are only 3 days left until his execution. If you can restore your body by then, you're invited to witness it if you wish to. Brian became startled, but Your Highness, members of the nobility can have their freedom bought, this rule you cannot offend. Roland waved his hand dismissively, indicating Brian shouldn't concern himself with it. He is a noble? Maybe for you, he was born in a branch family of the elk family, so the status you and he have are as much apart as heaven and earth. However, it's a fact that he has neither a title nor any land, so he simply cannot be considered as nobleman. In addition, even if he were a nobleman, to lead an invasion into the prince's temporal royal residence and attempt to burn the food stocks, ignoring the fate of the 2,000 people in border town, carried enough guilt. Adding these three sins together, he could simply not be forgiven. At the time when Roland ordered the death of Tyre, he felt a little hesitant within his heart, but fear Scar belonged to the entirely inexcusable category. If he were successful, all of Roland's own future plans for border town would be destroyed, and he would never get a chance to turn his situation around. This was more hateful than a direct assassination attempt at Roland himself. As for the possibility that his action would annoy Longsong's stronghold? Who cares? Since the other party did not want to cooperate with him, of course he would not compromise with them. They even tried choosing underhanded tactics to entrap the entire population of border town. At the same time, this incident also taught Roland a lesson. This world's political struggle was different than what he knew from his former world. There they would mostly concentrate themselves on competing under the table, but here they were more inclined to set the table aside and use a much bloodier method. Rest well. You lost too much of your strength, so don't leave the castle. I have arranged for other people to take over your patrol's work, and at the end of the months of the demons, I'll hold your canonization ceremony. Your Highness, after hearing the words canonization ceremony, Brian looked at the prince with disbelief. You mean? Yes, you will become one of my knights, Mr. Brian, replied Roland with a smile. Asterisk. Prepare, stab. Danner stabbed a wooden dummy with a pike, and on both sides his team members also did the same, with the same force and also from nearly the same angle. This time, it was already his 100th stab. He only had a tingling feeling left in his arms, and he already thought that he would never survive this training. Despite the fact that he began to have this thought after his 50th stab, he still endured. After 1 week of conditioning, it was already his natural reflex to obey every given order. Honestly, he himself was the most surprised that he could still endure. All, rest. After Iron Axe shouted his command, Danner could suddenly hear the sound of exhaling from everywhere around him. Danolet also exhaled, and then he put down the pike as he sat on the ground. Now, he finally realized that their own militia was not responsible for being the errand troop for the guards or the knights. After 1 week of eccentric training, the training changed more to the fighting portion. For example, now they were standing on the city wall and were thrusting out their pikes according to the captain's orders. Although these pikes were replaced with wooden poles, anyone could imagine their roles in the future. The logistics team would never do such exercises, so this also meant that they would confront the evil beasts on the wall. Naturally, thinking about this, Danner felt fear. He had even thought of sneaking away, but he didn't know why. Seeing his teammates around himself with the thought of 3 meals a day and a good salary slowly changed his mind. TN, Uncle Hill was changed into Uncle Hill. Chapter 33, Gunpowder. Not even a quarter-hour rest later, Iron Axe clapped his hands and shouted, "Everyone stand up, His Highness, the 4th Prince is coming." Danner soon returned to his place, due to the special training he had before. He had learned to follow orders almost subconsciously, so he took his pike dummy and assumed the ready position for stabbing with his wooden staff. The prince and his followers were walking behind them on the wall. Danner noticed from the corner of his eyes that the prince had slowed down his steps when he was near Vanner. Roland sighed silently. The sayings "a late evening will destroy the morning," and "to get up too early will ruin the whole day" were really true. Just when he had finished processing the aftermath of the raid on the castle, he was reminded that he had to inspect the militia's training results. Roland pitted himself. He hadn't slept the whole night, so now he was sleepy the whole day. But he had to come, since now the team had been transferred to the stage of combat training, and he, as the highest commanding officer, if he didn't show himself for a long time, the morale of his team would become unsteady. Well, what would someone usually say when reviewing the team? Roland thought for a bit. Are we only comrades only during good times, or are we also comrades during hardships? If he did not get an answer after shouting this slogan, the whole atmosphere would be very awkward. Maybe it would be better to just pull someone aside and talk with him, asking him for his impression and earning a good reputation. So he began to implement his new plan, and patted a young man who looked fairly sturdy on the shoulders. Is the training too hard, and do you feel tired? Is eating 3 meals a day enough? Based on his past experiences of watching the news, his response to his questions should be a loud shout, "Not tired, and very good." But the result was completely different than what he expected. The man turned directly towards him and went down on one knee, which really shocked Roland. Vanner felt that he had been blessed. His Royal Highness the Prince actually cared for him and even cordially asked him if he was tired from the training. When talking about the royal family, or even only ordinary nobles, they were usually all reluctant to speak a word with their soldiers. He unconsciously imitated a knight's salute to honor his Royal Highness. Regardless if this ritual was appropriate for him, he only had one thought: later when he returned to the streets, he could be considered a new person. When he was asked to stand up, his brain was still a mess, so he couldn't even remember what he had answered. In the end, His Royal Highness had asked all of them. If someone had any comments or suggestions about the training, he would step forward. Suddenly Vanner's mind was completely clear once again. This was a good opportunity. If his thoughts were true and His Highness militia had to guard the walls alone, they couldn't afford the heavy responsibility. Maybe my worries of running away or staying are unnecessary, right? He carefully thought about how to phrase the sentence. "Your Honor. Your respected Highness, the current numbers of the militia is too small. If we line up in the same way that we have trained during training, when the demonic beasts strike, we will only be able to defend 1/3 of the whole wall and won't survive." Even if the prince began to recruit several groups of militia now, Vanner was afraid that the training time wouldn't be enough. In addition, the weapons used by these people would also be a big expenditure. It was already difficult to supply for the 100 soldiers in the time left. Even now they were still holding their wooden staffs to train. If His Royal Highness Prince could also realize this point, maybe he would recruit a group of mercenaries from other towns as their main defense. At least they would not need training and could be directly sent on to the battlefield, and they were already carrying weapons and armor, but the price to hire them was relatively high. Roland thought for a moment, nodded and said, "Yes, you're right, with our current militia force to guard the whole city wall, isn't very realistic." Vanner felt very delighted. His Highness actually agreed with his view. But he did not expect the next words the prince said. "Demonic beasts are in a sense only a variant of normal beasts, they don't become more intelligent, right?" "Yes, Your Highness, their base forms are only ordinary animals, so the demonic beasts are still the same, even their habits are basically the same as they were before the change, but I have not seen many of them, so I'm not sure that this is true for all of them." That's what I wanted to hear. Although there are nearly 600 feet between the Shurshui River and the foot of the northern mountain slope, we could lure them to attack a specific area which we prepared beforehand. "You mean by using traps?" asked Iron Axe. "Yes, we could use traps, but not the kind commonly used by hunters. Common traps are used to capture prey by camouflage, but I intend to do the opposite. We will set up roadblocks in the direction away from the city walls, such as fences, slopes, and ditches, forcing these mindless demonic beasts to walk around them. Continuous barriers will guide the prey to a designated place, at which we will place our main defense." When Roland came to this point, he directly looked at Iron Axe. "As for how to lure these monsters, I think nobody knows more about it than you." After a short moment, Iron Axe answered, "It's no problem to guide them. The wolves have hydrophobia, the wild boars have photophobia, and the other demonic beasts also have their own fears. But Your Highness, this way we would need to face all the evil beasts at one small point. Will that not be too dangerous? If we only rely on pikes and bows, that would be true." Roland took a deep breath and said confidently, "But now we have a new weapon." When it was time for the prince's departure, he once again came to Vanner. "Your observations were very good. What's your name?" "Va Vanner, Your Highness. I will propose for you to be a vice-captain for one of the teams to my chief knight, Mr. Vanner, I'm very satisfied, good work. Asterisk. Next to the house for the production of cement, Roland built a new house. It was for the production of snow powder, or more precisely, gunpowder. It only had one big room which had an area of 300 square meters and only one entrance. He also implemented the most stringent security regime. 2 knights were always guarding the door, and anyone who wanted to enter were required to register first and go through body search, looking for something which could light a fire. Indoors. Any source of fire was prohibited, so it was only possible to work during the day. In order to even prevent Nightingale from sneaking into the room, he hung up a cotton curtain above the door. This is what you called the new weapon? Carter was summoned to take a look at the new invention. He took the powder in his hand and took a sniff. This is not snow powder, right? Perhaps Iron Axe didn't know what snow powder looked like, but Carter had often participated in royal ceremonies, so he naturally knew how snow powder looked. It was the alchemic workshop's finest creation. The recipe was a secret to outsiders, but if the prince desired to know it, he would certainly be able to get it. It's snow powder, but not entirely, said Roland. It's the alchemic workshop's last product improvement. I call it gunpowder. Gunpowder can be described as a product that was perfect for mass production. It didn't need any exotic materials. As long as you had charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter and mixed them at a ratio of 1 to 1 to 7.5, it could be produced without any technical barriers. In this time period, snow powder was mixed into a ratio of 3 to 1 to 1, and it also sometimes contained some strange materials, such as mercury, butter, honey, etc., which were sometimes mixed into it at a 2% ratio, but with the result of slower combustion and less gas release. This held no advantage for the gunpowder. However, Roland knew that the alchemist would constantly test other ratios, and he predicted that they would only need 30 years until a recipe close to the original gunpowder's recipe would appear. In the history of Roland's former world, gunpowder was invented a long time before the production of the first cold weapon. The reason for this was because the recipe and the corresponding weapon manufacturing process didn't work in unison. However, what many people ignored was the fact that one did not need to rely on guns. The gunpowder itself was a very formidable weapon. Chapter 34 Trial Explosion. At the beginning, when Roland started to build the cement creation house, he had already created a follow-up plan for future building projects. They were mostly centered on the northern mining area so that they could be easily guarded together. The construction of the brick cottage with a wooden ceiling was very fast, and didn't affect the building of the city wall. The vast amount of purchased saltpeter from Willow Town was transported to a nearby warehouse storage, and only helpers for grinding or weighing the saltpeter were allowed to enter the warehouse. The same procedure was implemented for the charcoal and sulfur as well, and the entire handling process for each of the materials was done by an entirely different group so that the risk of leaks was as minimized as possible. Roland weighed out 20 pounds of already produced gunpowder and slowly poured it into a good cutout bag of sheepskin. This gunpowder had to go through a strict processing plan. It had to be compacted, air-dried, broken down with a hammer, screened, and filtered. If all of the powder was a uniform granular size, only then was it guaranteed to have an outstanding combustion performance. To prevent accidents produced by static, the entire production process was done without any metal products. Instead, they used ceramic and wood products. After pouring all of the gunpowder into the sheepskin, Roland stacked 3 more layers of sheepskin on top of the bag and then tied them together with a rope. "That's all?" asked Carter. "Can this packet in front of him be called a weapon? Although it's a modified snow powder product, with sound alone, you can only scare someone, right? A peasant who has never been on a battlefield can affect a battle too, even if only a little. However, any trained soldier or mercenary would never look at them or respect them." But, the chief knight carefully reconsidered once more. The recent doings of His Highness seemingly had no reason at all, but the effects were always very alarming. If the demonic beasts have similar intelligence to that of an average animal, maybe this stuff can be unexpectedly useful? For example, I heard that a loud explosion could frighten animals, which would then flee, thereby reducing the pressure on the defender's side. Roland gave the wrapped-up gunpowder to Carter, and then he took a pouch with tools to burn the powder. All right, we have to go outside of the city wall. Iron Axe should already be waiting for us. To the west, about 2 miles from the city walls and located between the forest and the mountains was their designated testing area. Iron Axe and several other hunters had been waiting here for a long time. In addition to Iron Axe himself, the others were the best local archers. When they had heard that the tasks given to them were from His Royal Highness, they couldn't wait and immediately followed Iron Axe. At present, everyone knew that the new Lord of Border Town was never stingy regarding the remuneration of his employees. According to Roland's orders, they built a fence out of wooden poles and ropes, which were surrounded the whole testing area so that no one would trespass it. In the direction of the city wall, he had arranged his knights to prevent anyone from accidentally approaching. Roland checked all the preparations once more and then asked, "Have you brought the prey with you?" "Your Highness, it is here." Iron Axe dragged a cage with him and stepped forward. Carter, seeing the cage, noted that it was filled with a few pheasants and rabbits. "Good, put a tied-up animal every 5 steps away from the center, until you reach 30 steps from the center." Carter unnoticedly shook his head and tried to propose an improvement. "Your Highness, I am afraid that you chose the wrong animals. You can't test the effect with them, they are very timid and only a little sound needed before will flee. So if you can scare them, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will be able to scare the demonic beasts." "Scare away demonic beasts?" For a moment Roland slightly hesitated and answered, "I do not intend to frighten them, although the sound of the explosion will be an amazing thing." He took the bag with the gunpowder from his chief, went to the center, and put it down. Then he cut a small opening into the bag with his dagger and let some powder leak out. With that done, he took out bottles containing gunpowder and sprinkled a small trail of it, starting from the tear in the bag while continually stepping backwards. Today the weather was calm and was very suitable for the first gunpowder explosion ever. He stopped after he was nearly 100 yards away from the bag. Well, here it should be far away enough. He once again calculated the distance, and after the confirmation, he ordered Carter, "Go and get the hunters." At the moment, Roland's heart beat faster as he was full of expectation. He had already done a small test before, so he wasn't worried about the test results. But what he cared about was that this would be a historical moment. Starting today, thermal weapons will have officially stepped on the stage, and he will forever be remembered as the inventor of this milestone. After everyone had been gathered together, Roland ignited the gunpowder. Carter, while lying on the floor, looked on as the distance between him and the sparks rapidly increased. In his heart, he could not accept this as correct. They were so far away that they wouldn't even hear a bronze bucket full of snow powder, so didn't speak ever about producing any damage so far away, but His Royal Highness the Prince just had everyone lay down on the floor. But since the 4th Prince ordered it and did it himself, it wouldn't be good if he said anything. The ground was frozen over from the cold temperature. Across the chain armor, he could feel the chill spreading up. Carter shifted his body in preparation to save his chest from the cold when he suddenly heard an earth-shattering sound of an explosion. Since their distance to the gunpowder was too close, the sound of explosion and shock wave reached them at almost the same time. Carter felt his ears ringing, and then the world suddenly quieted down. When the earth tremors began to lessen, he looked up and saw a black cloud slowly rising into the sky, followed by gravel and mud which fell like rain. For Roland, the impact was much smaller than for the chief knight. Even if it was only a little firecracker, he would block his ears immediately when igniting the explosive powder, so he was naturally well prepared. The explosion was not like how explosions were in the movies, where they would always produce big fireballs. In the explosion, a lot of sludge was blasted off the ground, even reaching a height of more than 10 meters into the air. When the dust had firecracker dot settled down, the only feeling Roland had was that the sound was much louder than a loud firecracker. As for Iron Axe and the several other hunters, they had been stunned. They only knew from Iron Axe that this trip was to test a new weapon, but they had never expected that the momentum of the new weapon would be so fantastic. Perhaps it could only be compared to the sky's punishment, lightning and thunder. Roland stood up and took everyone back to the center of the explosion. Here, the ground became a half-yard deep pit, and the rabbit nearest to the blast center had completely disappeared, leaving only the short wooden stake at which it was tied to in the ground. He checked the other animals one by one. The pheasants placed at the distance of 10 steps and 15 steps were lying motionless on the ground, apparently dead. Although there was no visible trauma, Roland still knew that they died due to the shockwave. The only survivor was a gray rabbit 30 steps away, but its thin eardrums were destroyed, and blood was flowing out of the ears. Seeing someone coming close to it, it didn't try to struggle any longer and died, just as if the loud sound had taken its soul. Carter had to swallow. His constantly ringing ears slowly began to function normally again. He slowly came to realize what His Royal Highness the Prince meant when he said, "I don't intend to scare them." Was it really modified snow powder? With this kind of a result, I'm afraid that the power of the alchemic workshop will become much superior to the astrologers. The view with which Iron Axe looked at the prince had completely changed. "Your Highness, if the militia really would get such weapons, I think Border Town no longer needs to be afraid of the threat of the demonic beasts." "I do not know myself, but can it or be mass-produced?" Roland thought about it. "Probably not, until the months of the demons begins. I believe that we will only be able to produce 20 or 30 of them." The primary ingredient was saltpeter. In this era, the means of the production of saltpeter was very primitive. They would use the sewerage of the people and their livestock together with a lime mixture to separate out crystals of potassium nitrate. In addition to the upper nobility and the alchemic workshop, there was no great demand because there was almost no purpose for it, so there was not much of a production. If all of the saltpeter was used to make bombs, then it would soon be exhausted. They would need to use weapons like guns, bows, and crossbows as the main killers of the demonic beasts. Chapter 35 Home. Nightingale was walking through the fog. When she was looking outside from inside the fog, the outer world was only bicolor, black and white. The lines which were originally the borders of things were no longer very clear. The borders of straight lines, broken lines, and curved lines became ambiguous, like a picture painted by a child. This kind of feeling was somewhat hard to put into words. Nightingale took a long time to become familiar with how to distinguish between the borders. If Nightingale used her power correctly, she wouldn't be bound by anything while walking through the fog. Even for something like a wall, just looking at it from a slightly different angle would be enough to find a way through, but when looking at it in the real world, there would definitely not be an entrance. In the fog, up and down, front and back were no longer a fixed concept, they transformed into each other, or you could even say they overlapped. For example, what Nightingale was just doing. She entered the castle, which was under the watchful eyes of the guards, without being noticed. Then, within a step, the lines around her changed unpredictably, and she stepped through the ceiling out of nowhere, arriving in Anna's room. For her, this was an entirely free world without any rules. Nightingale was able to relax only in the world of fog. Even though it was silent and lonely, she would never encounter any threat there. Most of the time, the world in the fog was black and white, but occasionally she could see other colors. For example, when she was looking at Anna. The difference between a witch and an average person was their magic powers. Nightingale could see this force flowing and fading in a witch. This was the only color in the world of fog. She had never seen anyone like Anna before, with such a full and intense color, an aquamarine luster surging within her. In its center it was close to incandescent, she was almost unable to look at it. All this made Nightingale very confused, because in general, the color would show the witch's ability and magic power. In her time in the Witch Cooperation Association, she had seen a lot of witches with the fire ability when they used magic. The luster within them was always the color of orange or red, like the cloud of a living fireball, but regardless of size or brightness, other witches couldn't be compared with Anna. If this wasn't already difficult to understand, another point was even more incredible. Within her was such an enormous amount of magic, how could she still be alive? Within the whole Witch Cooperation Association, Nightingale had not found anyone with such an astonishing amount of magical power. Even if it were an adult witch, she would be a dwarf in comparison with Anna. If Anna were to become an adult. No, Anna would never have this opportunity. Nightingale had to sigh, because the stronger the magic power was, the stronger the bite would be. She could not even imagine what would happen when the time came for Anna to face her trial. She would likely face a terrible ordeal. The pain of feeling that her organs were torn from the inside out didn't let people lose consciousness until they gave up their resistance, accepting their death. They would be repeatedly subjected to constant pain. She walked out of the fog, letting her temporary depressed feeling fade away, and cheerfully said, "Good morning, Anna." Anna had already become accustomed to the other side's unwanted behavior of suddenly appearing. She nodded her head but did not answer, and continued practicing her flame instead. Nightingale rubbed her own nose and then went to the side of Anna's bed. Nightingale had already seen this kind of practice many times. She had even been watching when Anna had just started practicing. Accidentally igniting her clothes in the back garden shed, she always had a bucket full of clothes beside herself into which she could change. Later, she was able to make her flame skillfully dance at her fingertips. Then, even Roland no longer supervised her practice, but instead tore down the shed in the garden and turned it into a place to enjoy afternoon tea and sunbathe. Even so, according to the prince's orders from before, Anna continued to carry out her practice for 1 to 2 hours every day, but now in her own room. "I brought fish cake, do you want to eat it with me?" Nightingale took out a cloth from her bosom, opened it and divided the fish cake into a piece for each of them. Anna nodded after she smelled the fish cake. "Go wash your hands before you eat it," Nightingale laughed. Fortunately, Anna didn't hate Nightingale. After all, it would not be good for Nightingale to speak to herself. All in all, Anna was obviously very concerned for Nana but didn't express her concern very much. In fact, when she was not in front of Roland, she rarely spoke. In contrast, Roland talked too much. He always had a lot to say. For example, when eating a meal, he would have so many rules, such as wash your hands before eating, don't eat too quickly, don't pick it up and eat it after it has fallen to the ground, and so on. He could give a long statement for everything. At first, she was very impatient, but later she learned that it didn't matter because here she was the peasant and he was the master. After all, it was the fourth prince's castle. Since she lived here and ate his food, she reluctantly began to listen to his speeches. Now, she was also getting used to these rules. She didn't know why, but when she herself, Anna, Nana, Roland and Carter would compete for places in line for hand washing, she would feel an inexplicable hint of fun. Anna reached into the bucket filled with well water and cleaned her hands, and then she lit a flame to dry them. After that, she took her piece of fish cake and sat at the table, cutely taking a small bite into her little mouth to slowly chew it. "You really don't want to go back with me?" Nightingale asked her once more. "There, we will have a lot of sisters, they will take good care of you. Here, you can only live and do something within the range of the castle, don't you feel bored? Although they are called the impassable mountains, you can find lots of material to survive, and there we would all be one big family, everyone there has gathered together for the same purpose. Your magic power is so strong, they will happily welcome you. This winter, I'm afraid this winter will be your last." When she spoke until there, Nightingale trailed off. Perhaps it was already too late, she thought, even if they were back in the camp, for Anna to have such strong magic power, it would be almost impossible for her to get through adulthood. The only thing Nightingale could do for Anna was to stay by her side when she died. "How was your life as a child, before you joined of the Witch Cooperation Association?" Nightingale was startled by Anna's question. After all, she rarely asked any questions. "I used to live in a big city in the eastern part of the kingdom. Actually, it wasn't far from the capital." "Did you have a happy life?" "Happy?" No, she was unwilling to remember her daily life at that time. She had to depend on others, and was despised and mocked. When they found out that she had turned into a witch, her life became even worse than that of a cat or dog. She had a chain tied around her neck and was forced to work for them. So remembering this, Nightingale shook her head and whispered, "Why are you asking this? I lived in the old town areas." Anna once more told her own story. "My father sold me for 25 gold royals to the church, but since His Highness had let me out of the prison, I'm living a very happy life here. But, you cannot go out of the castle, and except Roland Wimbledon, the other people outside still hate witches. That isn't important for me, and he also said that he would change all this in the future. Can't he do that? That will be tough. As long as the church hasn't fallen yet, they will always speak of the witches as evil. Anna didn't refute immediately and became silent for a long time. It was even so long that Nightingale thought that Anna would never talk about this point again when she suddenly asked, "Where did you have a better life? When you were with the Witch Cooperation Association or living here with us?" "You. What did you say?" This question caught Nightingale totally off guard. "Well, of course. It would be with the Witch Cooperation Association, right?" To tell the truth, she wasn't really interested in the search for the Holy Mountain, but was interested in the place where all her friends were living. As for Border Town? If she hadn't heard that a witch was in danger, she would never have come to this town. So the answer should be very obvious, but why couldn't she say it the first time? Then, Anna began to smile. Nightingale had rarely seen her smile. Her eyes were shining like a lake in which the morning sun was reflected, glistening. Inexplicably, she felt at ease, even if she wasn't in her own world of the fog. "I heard Roland saying that the Witch Cooperation Association was looking for the Holy Mountain in the Northern Mountains, and that the Holy Mountain was a secure home for all of you, but for myself I think I have already found my Holy Mountain." This castle was her Holy Mountain. Nightingale realized that although Anna wouldn't live for much longer, her soul already arrived at the place where most witches long to be. At this moment, from the other side of the door, running footsteps could be heard. Nightingale listened carefully. They belonged to a panicking Nana. Then the door was opened, and it was really Nana Pine who rushed in. While tears ran down all over her face, she jumped into Anna's arms. What should I do?" "Sister Anna, my father has found out that I have become a witch." Chapter 36, Negotiation. Roland was dragged out of bed by Nightingale. After he had heard that Nana's father came for an audience, he was surprised at first. Soon he realized that this was a rare opportunity. If he wanted the girl to stay during the months of the demons and help fight against the demonic beasts, he would have to find a reason for the Pine family to remain in Border Town during winter. Originally, this was a very tricky situation. After all, the fourth prince's popularity among the nobility had plummeted, and he had a strained relationship with the stronghold. This were the reasons why most of them nobles leave Border Town. However, from the beginning, Roland hadn't considered working together with the nobles. They may have a lot of power, but they weren't suitable for a joined work. He quickly washed his face and dressed himself, then immediately went into the reception hall. Mr. Pine was already brought into the reception hall under the guidance of the guards. When Mr. Pine saw the prince, he immediately stood up, enraged, and asked, "Your Highness, where is my daughter?" This was the first time that Roland saw Nana's father. He had a muscular build, but wasn't too tall, and with his beard, he had a very rough image. With his cotton coat that reached his waist and his leather pants that had very large pockets, his dressing style looked more like that of a person from the Orient, rather than someone of noble rank. "She's fine, Mr. Pine. Why was she directly let through by the guards, while I was stopped at the door?" Nana's father interrupted him out of anger. "I need an explanation, Your Highness. Please bring my daughter out and let me see her." What was happening? Roland was full of wonder. He was convinced that Mr. Pine was clear about the situation, that his own daughter had unfortunately become a witch. So it would be normal if Mr. Pine humbly asked him to hide the message, or he would just allow Roland to solve the problem. But Roland had really not expected that Mr. Pine would be so aggressive and wouldn't act according to aristocratic etiquette. As to why the guards let Nana come in without questions was only because of Roland's standing orders. Nana would come every few days to play with Anna, so the guards were already used to her coming. After considering for a moment, Roland gave the order to have a maid bring Nana over to them. No matter how rude the other side behaved, he was still Nana's father, so it was only right to let the two meet and talk. If he showed any intention to send his daughter to the church or generally to abandon her, it wouldn't be too late to take measures against him. Nana and Anna both came together into the hall. At the moment Mr. Pine could see his daughter, the impertinence seen in his eyes immediately vanished. He opened his arms wide in the direction of Nana and shouted loud, "Dad is here, so come to me." But the little girl was just hiding behind Anna, only exposing half of her head. "I'll be sold to the church by you, right?" "Oh. You silly girl, what are you talking about? Naturally, I would never take you to the church, so let us go home together." This reaction somewhat confused Roland. According to Nightingale's story, Nana was seen by her father when she was using magic. Breaking out into a panic, she immediately fled to the castle in search of Anna. All along the way, she was followed by her murderous-looking father. But as it now seemed, he was only looking with eyes full of love and care at his daughter, completely unlike the usual feelings of hate with which witches were typically confronted with. So, had it only been a misunderstanding? For a moment Roland hesitated, but then he decided to take the bull by the horns and said, "Mr. Pine, your daughter became a witch, you surely know that." "Your Highness, what are you talking about? I don't understand you." Mr. Pine angrily stomped his feet and then went toward Nana, trying to grab her hand. However, Anna stepped in front of him, blocking his view of Nana. "Father, I have become a witch." "I'm so sorry," whispered Nana. Hearing Nana mention it once more, Mr. Pine became somewhat anxious. "Don't talk nonsense. How would you become a witch? What has that guy Carl taught you? I shouldn't have ever let you go to the college, there they only teach that rhetoric church shit." Hearing him talking like this, Roland suddenly began to understand the situation. It seemed that Nana's father tried to cover everything for his daughter up. Did he misunderstand Roland's intentions? So because of this, he was so restless until he could see Nana. "Anna," he gave her a sign with his eyes. Anna understood and nodded. Then she stretched out her right hand, in the direction of Nana's father, who still tried to reach his daughter. Flames began to spew out from her palm, direct near Mr. Pine's head, nearly burning him. Mr. Pine was shocked as he immediately stepped away from Anna. Nana also began to panic and hugged Anna's arm, trying to stop her. "Sister Anna, don't attack my father." "Your Highness, this is a dash. As you can see, she is also a witch, just like your daughter." Roland spread out his hand and said, "The reason why Nana has free access to the castle isn't what you think. Can we all calm down and talk about the future?" At this moment, Mr. Pine felt like he had awakened from a dreamlike state. He needed to start twice. "Your Highness, I." "Sit down first and then we can speak." Roland pointed to the table nearby. "Also have a cup of tea." "Well," he sighed, "my reputation was so bad, they even fear to let their children be near me." Now Roland fully understood Mr. Pine's rude behavior at the beginning. He had only shown his concern for his own daughter. When he had seen his daughter run into the prince's castle, and the guards were already used to her appearance, he couldn't think of any good reason for it. In case Roland was in Mr. Pine's position, he was afraid he would have tried to tear down the castle empty-handed. As for why he had denied back then that his daughter was a witch, his intention was very apparent. He feared that the prince would say Nana has fallen, so she needs to be purified. So he tried to convince himself and everyone else that his daughter wasn't a witch so that no one would care about her. Mr. Pine hesitated for a long time, but in the end, he still sat down and drank a whole cup of tea at once. After that, he wiped his mouth and looked a little embarrassed. "Sorry, my behavior was coarse." "Excuse me, since when do you know that my daughter has turned into a witch?" "Since before the winter. I wasn't the first one who had found out that she has awakened, it was her teacher Karl van Bart. Due to her and Anna being friends, he sent Nana to me, so that I could look after her and that I could protect her," explained Roland carefully. "The last 1.5 months, she came to the castle to learn her ability without fear of discovery. By the way, your daughter's ability is to heal." "Is that right?" Mr. Pine scratched his head. "So that was the reason why the cat could suddenly run and jump again." "Cat? Asterisk cough. In fact, it doesn't matter. When I came home, I saw a boy who was sitting in the doorway with a cat which was hit by a carriage in his arms. I planned to hide the cat from Nana's view so that she wouldn't be frightened. I didn't think that she had seen me and would immediately run to me looking for the cat. It was very obvious that the cat had been hit, and her leg was broken. He looked at Nana and Anna. So you were friends? Anna didn't say what she thought, but Nana quickly nodded her head. Mr. Pine, seeing his daughter's reaction, his expression softened a bit. Upon seeing this, Roland asked, "You do not seem to think that the witches were people tempted by the devil and had become his spokesperson?" "My daughter is undoubtedly not a wicked person." He categorically denied this possibility. "No matter what she has become, I have no doubt about this." Anna's father and Nana's father were entirely different kind of people. Roland couldn't help but feel that he now could somewhat understand why Nana was always so carefree, always having a smile on her face. Such a family, for a child, it was just like a warm cradle. "I also do not think so, Mr. Pine." Then Roland said bluntly, "Your daughter's ability to heal other people is of great significance for me. I want her to stay in Border Town, helping me to fight the demonic beasts during the months of the demons." Hearing this, Mr. Pine hesitated. "Your Highness, I am afraid I will have to refuse your request. When the demonic beasts come, it will become very dangerous in this town. I cannot leave her in this small town." Since the Pine family didn't belong to the territory under the jurisdiction of Border Town, so even he as a prince couldn't directly command them to stay. But as long as Mr. Pine was willing to sit down and talk, Roland was sure that he could convince him. Chapter 37, Family History. The danger isn't as great as you think, Mr. Pine. If something is dangerous, it will also always offer some opportunities. In his head, the fourth prince went through all the information his assistant minister had collected once more. "I heard that you inherited your title from your father. He became a knight through merits gathered from battle, awarded the rank of baron and given his own territories." "That is true," confirmed Mr. Pine. "It was at the time of the months of the demons. A small group of demonic beasts unexpectedly broke through the stronghold defense near the Shurshui River and were running rampant. When Nana's father was on patrol, he encountered the rampaging demonic beasts. Instead of avoiding them like most people would do, he notified the stronghold, asking for reinforcements, and began to siege the demonic beasts to save the nearby town, even though he had no relationship with the town." While speaking, Roland observed the expressions of the other people. "But Mr. Pine, you should know the things which happened at that time better than me. Your father called for the militia from the town. Then, with his attendants and the militia, he fought the demonic beasts and won. That large battle was fought to stand up for the innocent." Yes, his tone was a bit agitated, apparently full of longing for his own family history. There was also an unusually big one. Some parts resembled a deer's and some parts a bull's. It was a fusion of both of them. Its legs were thicker than my father's torso, and when it was ran, the ground trembled. If I were in his position, I really wouldn't have known how to beat the monster. But he did it. My father stood near a shallow trench, luring the furious demonic beast over. It accelerated and was trying to take advantage of its speed at the moment of their collision. My father laid down in the shallow trench and wedged his sword between two stones so that only the sword tip was visible. The seemingly unbeatable idiotic beast couldn't stop, and its belly hit the tip of the sword. The entire stomach was cut open, black blood and some intestines flowed out of its belly. It was so much that my father almost drowned within the trench. Even today, the spoils of that battle, the great horn of the demonic beast, hangs above my family's fireplace." Roland, who was sipping his tea leisurely, said, "It was an admirable fight. He followed the knight's code of faith, compassion, and bravery. Later he got his knighthood and a manor in the fiefdom of Joe Cole, who was still the lord of the Longsong stronghold at that time. 25 years ago, Joe Cole was promoted to the rank of a duke by His Majesty Wimbledon III, becoming the part-time guardian of the southern border. With this, the whole southern border territory was placed under his jurisdiction. Unfortunately, after his promotion, Joe Cole became an eyesore to his former supporter Duke Ryan. Your Highness, you might know well that." Mr. Pine's voice sounded somewhat frustrated, even when the ranks of Duke Ryan and Joe Cole were different, their levels of power were already even. Cole's blood could be traced back to a branch of the royal family, so his ancestry wasn't worse than that of Duke Ryan's. This was a political scheme. Roland's side, Wimbledon 3, actually tried to check and balance their level of power. In order to understand this complicated relationship, Roland had to call for his assistant minister for explanations. The noble and feudal jurisdiction were extremely confusing. In theory, the higher nobility has the right to issue orders within the territory of the lower nobility. But the actual situation was much more complicated. Duke Ryan and Joe Cole were an example of this. Although he was placed in the western border territory under Duke Ryan, Joe Cole, as the king's directly announced count, he had no less prestige and power than Duke Ryan. When Joe Cole became the Duke of the Southern Territory, his power in his old territory became even stronger. This was a method of the royal family of Greycastle to hold the power stable. But when you inherited the territory of your father, the trade and the agricultural production gradually faded. Roland slowly said, "But now, there is a new opportunity in front of you." "What is this new opportunity?" "Surely you had heard of the famine 2 years ago. The stronghold was withholding the food for the next months, because of the reason that the amount of ore mined by the inhabitants of border town was too small. This year, we are faced with the same dilemma again. The unexpected collapse of the northern slope mine didn't leave any route of retreat for the people of border town. We must block the demonic beasts at the new city walls. Perhaps the fight won't go smoothly, but as I said before, facing this dangerous task also means a new opportunity for us." Mr. Pine had to first understand the meaning of what the prince said, so he only frowned and didn't immediately give his answer. "To be honest with you, you do not really resemble a typical noble." Roland gently smiled. "No noble would go out dressed like you, and your hands are full with crusts and calluses. Mr. Pine, you didn't let your father's inheritance down, right? You're a knight with excellent fighting skills." He certainly did not let his father down. Roland was very sure of this, or Mr. Pine wouldn't have trained and ran through the woods for a whole day. According to the information provided by Berev, in the last week, Mr. Pine had spent at least 3 days training in the forest. On each visit, he was always fully equipped, and if he couldn't afford it for his attendants, he directly hired some helper from the town of Orion. Some people were just born for battle. Mr. Pine was obviously such a person. "If you will stay in border town, I will provide you with the opportunity to let you regain your father's glory. Just like he did, you will get the chance to obtain honor and outstanding achievements with only your sword and your courage. I'll also reward you with a territory in the east of the border town, and you will become a viscount appointed by me." Although this would be a rare situation, the commitment would be valid. As an adult prince, he was able to legally canonize viscounts, barons, and knights. However, he could only seldom confer such titles to other people. 1. It would undercut the regional system of aristocracy, and 2. If the other side refused the offer, it would become more awkward. Roland didn't care about the opinion of the local nobility, he just wanted Nana to stay in border town. As for refusing Mr. Pine, Roland wasn't too worried. After Joe Cole had become the guard of the Southern Border Guard, his relationship with Mr. Pine's father didn't carry on. He had entirely abandoned the Pine family. When hearing this, Mr. Pine finally began to talk again. "Then, Your Highness, if I stay, can I still send Nana back to the stronghold? Until now, no one had ever tried to resist the demonic beasts in this place. If we fail, I do not want my daughter to be buried here. As I already told you in the beginning, Mr. Pine, the danger in staying here is relatively low. Have you ever thought about what would happen if Nana was found to be a witch in Longsong Stronghold? There it would be entirely different than here in Border Town. The stronghold is completely in the possession of the church. They have already grown their roots in the city for a long time. Their believers and overseers are everywhere in the city. At the moment she is exposed, even I won't be able to save her." Roland paused, then added, "Border Town will definitely not fall. When the months of the demons arrive and the demonic beasts come, I'll be on the wall to lead my people and fight alongside them." Our opponents are nothing more than a group of mutated beasts, they are not invulnerable. Your father had no cover and was able to win against them in an open surrounding. However, we have the new city walls. If instead, I really only mean if an accident does happen, I'll take measures to guarantee that Nana will immediately leave the town. He paused for a second, and naturally, Anna will also move. I will prepare a boat for them at the dock beforehand, so I can promise you that they will be safe. So, I will believe in you, Your Highness. When saying this, Mr. Pine stood up and went directly down on one knee to give the standard knight salute to the prince, and I am willing to fight for you. After Nana and her father had left, Anna rolled her eyes at Roland. What are you talking about? She firmly said, I'm not going anywhere. Chapter 38 The Era of Hot Weapons. Iron Axe became aware of the fact that they were now under watch. The hunters who had participated in the test explosion moved together into a two-story house near the castle. Looking through the window, he could see that the house was encircled by stone walls and guards were stationed at the entrance. He did not mind this regulation, and the fact that His Highness only sent 2 guards to oversee them showed that he trusted them. Until now, Iron Axe continued to repeat the roaring explosion within his head. Until now, there was never a weapon that could bring him such a strong shock. In the extreme south of his homeland, he had seen how orange fire erupted out of the ground, and this fire could continue to burn for decades. He had seen endless storms with monstrous waves. However awfully unpredictable these powers were, they were the will of Mother Earth or the god of the sea. They were the iron whip that disciplined all living things. But now, His Highness began to challenge the power of the gods, obtaining a power only seen during heaven's punishment. Although when compared with the real lightning and thunder, the difference was still great. Reaching such a realm of power wasn't possible for humans. In the Sand Nation, anyone who would participate in such a demonstration or later use it would normally get their tongue cut off. Of course, this was not the safest way to keep secrets. Only the dead could keep secrets from spreading. As a foreigner, they would only see him as blasphemer, and it was forever impossible for a foreign clansman to get into the core hierarchy. The prince knew that Iron Axe was only a half-blood, but he still allowed him to witness the curse of fire. Even more, he also let Iron Axe be responsible for the formation of the hunting squadron. The trust His Highness had within him was burned deep into Iron Axe's heart. During his time in the Sand Nation, he had experienced countless betrayals of friends or family who framed him for their wrongdoings. When he fled to the kingdom of Greycastle's south border, he still had to suffer discrimination because of his half-Sand Nation and half-Greycastle lineage. He eventually arrived in Border Town, disheartened. Here, he intended to rely on his hunting skills to spend the rest of his life in peace. However, he had never expected to meet His Royal Highness, the Prince, here. And of all things, he had never expected that the prince would even trust him. He had no doubt that with this new weapon, the one who would win the battle for the throne would be Roland Wimbledon. When he thought about fighting for the future king and the promising opportunities he would get, Iron Axe became wholly excited. Everyone, come down to gather. When Iron Axe heard this shout, he took a quick look through the window and saw Roland's chief knight Carter and 4 other knights coming. Iron Axe first finished dressing himself, then walked down the stairs to stand at attention in front of Carter. Since he had participated in the militia training, he knew that His Highness preferred discipline, since he would adjust them to a Unitoff uniformity. The other members of his hunting squad were a lot slower. It took about 6 to 7 minutes before they lined up as a team. Everyone, follow me to the old place. Carter didn't care much about how the hunter squad lined up. Instead, he went straight to the city wall. It was still the same place as the explosion test. But this time, His Highness didn't set up a safety area. In addition to Roland, there were already 4 knights waiting for them. They were all Carter's subordinates. Iron Axe noted that His Highness had begun to play with an unusually shaped iron stick while explaining something to the knights. When Roland saw the hunting squad, he came to them and asked, "How is living at the new houses? Have you already become used to it?" "Thank you for your highness' care." Everyone bowed and stated that the new homes were comfortable. In fact, the new houses they moved into were many times better than the old homes. At least they had no air leaks, and the roofs were also not made of translucent straw bedding, but were made of neat and tidy tiles instead. "This is good," Roland nodded, pleased. "The current arrangements are needed out of security reasons. But you will only need to live there until the end of the months of the demons, then you will be able to move back to your former living places. In addition, the salary for the first month has been paid to your families, and every weekend you will be allowed to see them face to face. Of course, you will be accompanied by guards." "Thank you for your kindness, Your Highness," said the hunter squad cheerfully. This was really a bit surprising for Iron Axe. Leaving aside the law of Sand Nation, even the military management of Grey Castle shouldn't be this lax. Could it be that this was because of His Highness' kindness? Iron Axe became somewhat worried. If His Highness wanted to compete for the throne, he needed to be ruthless. This he knew well from his life in Sand Nation. However, when the fourth prince began to talk about new weapons, based on the development of the gunpowder, he put his worries into the back of his mind. Iron Axe stared without blinking at the two iron bars which the prince had placed in front of them. "These weapons are called guns," Roland said. "Next, I'll tell you how to use them." In the next half hour, they had to learn how to use the new weapons. Take the black powder, which was the cause of the explosion, and fill it into the barrel of the gun. Then, a lead ball was stuffed with a poker into the barrel, straight to the end. After that, they had to pour the gunpowder into the igniting chamber, aim, and then pull the trigger. Iron Axe had considered himself to be a master of many weapons, whether it be swords, knives, hammers, axes, or spears. He was well trained with all of them, but he had also needed long years of training and combat skills to master them. Learning how to use a new weapon in only 30 minutes, he was afraid that the speed to master this weapon could only be compared to the crossbow. The other gun was handed to Carter. The chief knight was also full of interest in the novelty of this weapon, and he didn't want to put them down. After several rounds of simulation, Roland set up 2 targets to let them see the power of the guns. The first target had wooden armor in front of its chest. The wooden armor was held up by 2 knights standing at a distance of about 30 feet away. The prince led Carter and Iron Axe through the shooting technique. Then, they aimed and pulled the trigger. When they heard the loud sound of fire, every person present jumped up out of shock. Iron Axe was no exception, but soon only surprise was left on everyone's face. Looking at the target's wooden armor, they could see a small hole. The lead ball had cleanly shot through the chest armor's thickest part. Before shooting, Iron Axe had carefully observed this armor. It was clearly not a handicraft workshop's inferior product built from bad materials. The marks of the hammer and anvil on the neckline proved that this was a product of Grey Castle's blacksmith standard. The thickest part was half a finger thick and was strong enough that it could ward off a direct hit from a crossbow, fired at the closest distance. To deal with this kind of armor, a heavy crossbow or a warhammer would be a wise choice. So comparing it with a crossbow, the difficulty to use the weapon was the same, but the power of a gun was far better than that of a crossbow. In addition, the gun's loading speed and the loading speed of a crossbow were nearly equivalent, so, looking at the target which was 30 feet away, Iron Axe couldn't see a problem. "Your Highness, how many weapons do we have of this kind?" asked Carter. "Currently, only these 2, and until the months of the demons, we can only produce 2 more at most." Iron Axe could see that hearing this, Carter was clearly relieved. He was able to guess Carter's thoughts. If this weapon was easy to manufacture, then with only a few days of training, everyone would be able to train a large number of express warriors who were bringing guns to battle. Then people at any age, with any strength and even any sex, even a fragile woman, could be a significant threat to the knights. Although the shock he got from this weapon was smaller than that of the Curse of Fire, it still was a powerful weapon. Iron Axe thought, with this great power, they could easily kill a large number of rugged-fleshed demonic beasts from high up on the wall. Even if they would face a mixed species, with these firearms, maybe the outcome would be not so embarrassing. But the real significance of such a weapon was clear to Roland. He personally opened the door to the time of wars with hot weapons. Chapter 39 The Winter is Coming. Roland was standing on the city wall, facing the north. This past month, he repeatedly checked the castle, the mine, and the city walls in a kind of three-point loop. He checked them for every possible detail so that he wouldn't miss anything. The militia became very adept at handling their weapons. Due to Carter's repetitive drills, they were able to stabilize the pike until the militia captain loudly gave the command to slash with their pikes. Standing behind the militia was the hunter squad. Every hunter who remained in border town and was good with either the bow or the crossbow was incorporated into this squad. These seasoned hunters were the backbone for killing the demonic beasts. Standing only 12 feet away from demonic beasts on the city wall, it was nearly impossible for them to miss their target. The last line of defense were Iron Axe, Carter, and 2 hunters from the elite team who were under Iron Axe. The parts manufactured by the blacksmiths were enough to let Anna weld 4 flintlocks. They would only shoot the flintlocks when a mixed species attacked or the hunters with crossbows were unable to penetrate the skin of the demonic beasts. Their location on the wall wasn't set, so the 4 of them had to patrol the whole 200-yard-long defense line. If there was a need for them anywhere, they would appear. As for the explosives, they were kept under heavy protection next to the wall in the warehouse. To keep everyone safe, the gunpowder was stored in its 3 components, and it would only be put together on the city wall when needed. After all, if the powder detonated at the wrong time, the self-inflicted damage would be even greater than the damage from the demonic beasts. The teeth of the demonic beasts may be able to crush the cement, but if the explosives went off, the whole wall would be destroyed. So far, Roland had organized 2 test runs, both including the use of the explosives. Thanks to these 2 exercises, the militia was used to the loud roars of the explosions and were no longer so scared that they threw their weapons away. The other advantage was that when the defenders discovered that the prince held such incredible weapons in his hands, the team morale suddenly began to skyrocket. "Your Highness," Berev tightened his collar, "we have already spent most of the ore income in the last half-month, so if the months of the demons actually goes on as long as the astrologers have predicted, I fear that the food won't last till the end of winter." "Then I want you to fill up the entire vault," Roland said without hesitation. "Make another deal with Willow Town and don't make it the only one. The first steam engine has already been transported to the mine, and the gravel from the collapse has already been completely cleaned up. During the entire winter, we can still get a little yield from the mines. Rough stones are especially in demand. Do not emphasize on price. Instead, sell them as soon as possible so that our wheat and meat storages are always as full as possible." Berev nodded. "I'll give out the orders immediately, Your Highness." Just. Seeing the hesitant look on his assistant minister's face, Roland certainly understood what he wanted to say. "Do not worry, I have already arranged a boat. If the line of defense is broken, I will leave the town immediately." "That's excellent to hear," said Berev, relieved. Roland smiled at him and said, "You can go. After all, you have enough to do. I have to look for someone else." After Berev left, the prince slowly stepped onto a watchtower. This place was at the center of the city walls and was their highest point. From here, he could overlook the whole front line, parts of the jungle, and the nearby hills. At such a height, the wind was blowing quite strongly, but Roland didn't care. Only on this high and open platform could he somewhat calm down and forget the coming war. "You lied to him," someone next to him suddenly said. "You don't intend to leave this town. Life is already so difficult, keeping a few secrets sometimes is good for everyone. You're talking nonsense and don't understand the situation. If you already consider the identity of a prince as a difficulty, what would you see us as?" Nightingale emerged out of the fog. "Even if you will not be the king, you still have to live through the 5-year-long struggle for the throne because you're one of the main parties. Compared to worrying about such unimportant matters, you should better accompany Anna. I'm afraid she doesn't have much time left." For a moment Roland remained silent. "I don't think that she will die during the months of the demons." "Why?" She said that she will not lose to the devil's bite. He paused for a second, and I believe her. You actually believe what a witch says? Nightingale shook her head, but we are cursed by the devil. Are you? Well, I also believe you. Asterisk. Brian was wearing his civilian clothes, and was standing in front of Greyhound's tombstone. He gently stroked the surface of the new stone. It was a pure white stone, and on its surface were engraved the words, in memory of one of the silent heroes of Border Town. Greyhound. I've already realized my biggest dream. At the end of the months of the demons, His Highness, the fourth prince, will hold the canonization ceremony for me. But, I don't want to sit on the bed waiting for my canonization. My wounds have already healed, so the city wall is the place where I should be. The months of the demons is near, and the demonic beasts may be strong, but they will have to go through the line of defense the militia established, and will no longer able to advance. I will also take over your part in defending the town, and brandish my sword in your name. All this will not be the end. Your murderer is still alive. But he will not live much longer. His Highness already promised this to me. The next time I come to you, I'll bring good news. Brian bent down and placed a bouquet of flowers at the gravestone. So goodbye, my friend. Asterisk. Sister Anna, are you scared? Nana, who was lying on Anna's bed, asked her this. Afraid of what? The devil's bite we have to face this winter. I became a witch during the autumn of this year, so it will be the first time I have to face it. Well, the first time, Anna thought, will be very painful, and sometimes you think that you can't wait any longer and wish that you could finally die. Ah! Nana began to shout out of shock, but she immediately covered her mouth. But you will survive, just like me. I do not know, whispered Nana, I'm not like you, so strong, and afraid of nothing. I'm not really that strong, said Anna as she closed her eyes. The scene when she met Roland for the first time emerged in her mind. Down there in the cold and dark dungeon, Roland's clothes were draped over her body. He softly said that he would hire her. Until now, she still got goosebumps when remembering this. Sometimes you will encounter situations or things that will give you the will to live on, even if you need to struggle hard to survive. Such as, for example, meat marinated in soy paste. Anna sighed. How should I know what you dream of? Ah. Seeing that Nana was entirely staring at her, Anna wiped her face with her hand. What are you looking at? Is there some dirt on my face? No, Nana shook her head. I'm just a bit surprised. You've never talked to me so much. Sister Anna, the appearance you had when you just closed your eyes and thought about the past, you were so beautiful. Anna rolled her eyes, jumped out of the bed, and went to the window. Nana followed directly behind her. What are you looking at? Do you want to flee into the forest? The forest is in the west, answered Anna snappily. Here you can only see the Shui River. Sister Anna, look. The little girl pointed at the sky. Anna was startled, then opened her window. A surge of wind mixed with little snowflakes came into the room. She held out her hand, catching the flower-like sparkling snow. She could feel a chill coming from her fingers. It's snowing. Asterisk. After long silence, Nightingale opened her mouth and began to speak once more. You actually didn't lie. Of course, Roland laughed. I had very little reason to lie. Nightingale said nothing. She only tilted her head, and an unknown look emerged in her eyes. Suddenly, she felt something cold on her neck, and she couldn't help herself from shrinking away. She looked up only to find that unbeknownst to her, the snow had begun to fall on the walls. Under the gray sky, there seemed to be an uncountable number of snowflakes. They danced in the wind, flying all over the place, accompanied by the shouts of the militia. The months of the demons had begun. Chapter 40 Letter. The firewood was burning violently, but Gerald Wimbledon didn't feel much of the heat. Although he was in a large tent made of stitched leather, and the ground was also completely sealed without any air leakage, he still felt cold. His toes were especially cold, they were almost frozen to the point that he couldn't feel them any longer. This damn place, even the urine freezes when you take a piss, he spat and stood up. He grabbed the table on both sides with his hands. When he used all his strength, so that even his hand became red from the effort, the 6-foot square wooden table became lively and left the ground. After he put the table at the edge of the fire pit, Gerald felt a lot more comfortable. He took off his shoes and put his feet next to the fire, warming them in the heat. He spread out the text scroll with his hands once more and continued to write the unfinished letter. Dear lovely Olivia. It has been already a month since I came to Hermes, but of course, the church prefers to call this place their new holy city. If it wasn't for the months of the demons, I wouldn't want to stay here for even a moment. I just want to get back to you and share the warm bed with you once more. Faithful to the convention, the church is monitoring us with their own forces instead of supporting us. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Speaking about the church, I have to admit that what they were able to do is really amazing. I can still remember the time when I was here for the first time. It was around 20 years ago. In addition to the mountains and rocks around Hermes, there was nothing here besides a little church at the bottom of the mountains. But now, they have not only opened up a road for a carriageway up the mountain peak, but they have also established a large-scale fortress city. During the summer, you really should come and take a look at this city with me. The new holy city is even grander than our Grey Castle. Do you remember the theater in Grey Castle? You and I had gone there to watch The Revenge of the Prince. You were so impressed with the theater's architecture, the interior was so spacious that it was unbelievable. But after you see the holy city's new Hall of Military Affairs, you will think that the theater in Grey Castle was only a shack. It is hard to call it a building, I think it's more like a piece of exquisite art. It's so spacious that it could swallow 5 theaters. However, not a single pillar supports the exterior walls. The walls are held up by 8 behemoth-like demonic beast bones. Between the curved bones are many smaller bones which are connected by hemp ropes, and the roof hovers in midair as if it were on a pole. How could they think off a building like this? And those bones, if they were stripped from a demonic beast, I bet that guy's size was certainly more than 100 feet. Probably only in Hermes will you be able to encounter such a monster. But honey, please do not worry, even if the demonic beasts are massive, they are still the devil's minions. In the presence of God's eye of retribution, no evil can escape God's jurisdiction. Whether it is a demonic beast, a witch, or the devil himself, their only fate is to turn into ashes. When he had written until here, Gerald Wimbledon put down his pen and loosened up his tingling hands. This was really strange. Normally he could hold his 15 pounds, heavy two-hand sword all day, but while holding the pen he was only able to write a few sentences before he felt so tired. He smiled in a self-deprecating way and thought that he really was made for a yokel's life. When speaking of demonic beasts, I suddenly think of my 4th brother. He was assigned to Border Town, such a miserable place. I'm afraid he has already turned tail and fled to Longsong Stronghold. Even there, the demonic beasts will not be able to reach him and the stronghold's defense is comparable to Hermes. But I think this is not his fault. Even if I went to that place, I would only be able to take refuge in the stronghold. Here it can be seen how unfair my father is. Just because our younger brother performed exceptionally intelligently from an early age, he decided to let him inherit the throne. Father forgets that he himself didn't win the throne with calculating means. Since our mother's death, it has become more and more difficult for me to find out what father is thinking. Gerald hesitated before he began to write the next part of his letter. He did not know if he should tell his real intentions to Olivia or not. He paused for a moment, but then he decided to write it down. If his plans went well, he should already have arrived at the palace in Grey Castle before she received his letter. My dear, astrologer Anstur was right. If I do nothing, ultimately the throne will not end up in my hands. Anstur observed the stars and what he said was, the star of the apocalypse will burn for the next 4 months before it leaves its orbit again. This tells me that I obviously have little time left and cannot wait in vain any longer like this. After today's battle, I will quietly return to the capital and meet my father, and I will take my loyal soldiers with me. Here maybe I have much less opportunities to get riches like in the city of Golden Harvest, but instead there is no shortage of brave warriors here. I just have to throw some coins around and make some promises, and they will follow me like hungry wolves, and help me reach my goal. Of course, I do not want to start a revolt. I just want to personally ask my father why he gave the orders to start the battle for the throne. In the end, what was it that let him forget that I, as his eldest son, have the right of inheritance? Ansgar has already arranged everything for me. Olivia, my love, you will only need to wait a little longer. The day when I become the king is the day that I will marry you as my queen. If I fail miserably, you shouldn't come back to the capital, but instead, you should stay in the kingdom of eternal winter. Love you, Gerald. He carefully folded the letter and put it in an envelope, then sealed it with wax. After checking it a few times, he knocked on his table and his personal guard quickly entered the tent. You have to deliver this letter to the hands of the Rose family in the freezing Wind Mountain range. You do not have to travel all day and night. Don't even take a horse, just travel dressed as an ordinary traveler, as a passenger on a wagon from town to town. You only have to remember one thing: this letter must be hand-delivered. Yes, Your Royal Highness. Good, you may leave. After Gerald waved his guard away, he simply sat down at the table once more, letting his feet hang over the fire pit. If something happened, he would have no way out. He closed his eyes, recalling scenes of his childhood. At that time, he was playing hide and seek with his second brother and his third sister in the king's garden. When his third sister fell down, she needed her two brothers to take care of her. Exactly when had it began that the three of them became more and more like strangers? Gerald shook his head, putting his confusing thoughts aside. It wasn't suitable for him to become sentimental, he thought. There was only one possibility to end this: he himself had to sit on the throne. At this moment, the dull sound of a horn could be heard in the tent. Oh, 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 dash. I'm coming. He jumped up from the table and put on his shoes. Stepping out of the tent, he saw that the whole camp was a riot. Everywhere, soldiers were running and waving flags, merging into one big chaos, getting into battle formation. From the distant mountains a muddy echo came in continuous stretches. When the horn blew, it meant the demonic beasts were attacking. Come with me. He rode on his warhorse, taking his guards with him. Only one person remained standing on the walls of the holy city. In order to experience its grandeur, it was like an insurmountable natural moat, standing across the path through the impassable mountain range. The pass to the top was flat and wide. It was wide enough for dozens of people to pass through side by side. At the beginning of the path, there were cliffs formed by a glacier on both sides, but the later part was a plateau. This was why the church desperately wanted to build the new holy city to the top of the mountain. Using this terrain, they built a line of defense that was almost impossible to break through. However, Gerald Wimbledon looked at it more in long run. They were able to transport so many stones and timber from the foot of the hill to the top. In just 20 years, they were able to build a city in Hermes. The power the church had exhibited was astounding. But regardless of how tired he was of doing business with the church, Gerald had to admit that they also had their strong points. If they didn't build the stronghold in Hermes, all countries on the continent would have had to face a catastrophe. They were also responsible for the convention against the demonic beast horde. Every year during January, when the demonic beasts attack, the four kingdoms which border Hermes must send troops to support the church and fight together under the church's verdict. Their four banners were floating in the wind. A snake wrapped around the scepter of the Kingdom of Dawn, the shield and sword of the Wolf-Shark Kingdom, the ice rose of the Kingdom of Eternal Winter, as well as the tower and pike of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. Looking at the black spots appearing in the distant sky, Gerald Wimbledon clenched his great sword.